The crack of Derrick Vaughn's palm against her cheek echoed through the coffee shop like a gunshot. Margaret Carson's head snapped to the side, silver hair breaking free from its clipped blood trickling from her split lip. She was 58 years old, 5'4", and weighed maybe 130 pounds soaking wet. To everyone watching, she was just another invisible old woman who'd made the mistake of speaking up. "Die, old lady!" Derrick screamed, his fist already rising for another blow. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Margaret "Ghost" Carson had spent 24 years teaching Navy SEALs how to kill from a mile away. And she never, ever forgot a face. Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Stay with us until the end to see how this story unfolds, and comment below with your city so we can see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The morning had started like every other morning for the past 6 years. Margaret Carson woke at 0500 hours. She'd never been able to break the military habit of thinking in 24-hour time, made her bed with hospital corners tight enough to bounce a quarter, and stood at her kitchen window watching the sun paint the San Diego sky in shades of amber and rose. Her hands weathered and marked with the calluses of decades holding rifles wrapped around a mug of black coffee. No sugar, no cream. Some habits die harder than others. At 0630, she left her small ranch house in Claremont and drove her 15-year-old Honda Civic to the Veterans Haven coffee shop on Morena Boulevard. The shop was owned by Tommy Rodriguez, a former Army medic who'd lost his left leg below the knee in Kandahar. Tommy made the best coffee in San Diego and never charged veterans full price, though Margaret always left a 20 on the counter when she thought he wasn't looking. "Morning, Ghost," Tommy called out when she entered using the call sign she'd carried for over 2 decades. Only the old-timers knew who she really was. "Morning, Tommy. How's the leg?" "Acting up. Weather's changing." He was already pouring her usual black coffee extra hot. "You staying or going today?" "Staying. Got nowhere to be." That was the hardest part of retirement, Margaret had discovered. For 24 years, every minute of her day had been accounted for, structured, purposeful. She'd trained 3 generations of Navy SEAL snipers at the Coronado Naval Base, teaching them the mathematics of wind and distance, the psychology of patience, the brutal calculus of taking a human life from 1,000 yards away. Now her days stretched out like empty ranges, quiet and purposeless. She took her usual seat by the window, opened her worn paperback Lonesome Dove for the 4th time, and sipped her coffee. Around her, the morning crowd filtered in. Retirees, mostly veterans like herself. People who'd served their country and now found themselves adrift in civilian life, trying to find meaning in the mundane. At 0645, the bell above the door chimed and everything changed. 4 men entered, loud and taking up space in that particular way some men have, as if the world exists to accommodate them. They were young, early 30s at most, with the build and bearing of former military. Margaret clocked them immediately, the way they moved, the way their eyes scanned the room. The casual arrogance of men who'd been trained to be dangerous and thought that made them special. The leader was tall, maybe 6'2", with broad shoulders and arms covered in tactical-style tattoos. His t-shirt was deliberately tight, showing off muscles he'd clearly spent hours cultivating. He had a handsome face, the kind that probably opened a lot of doors, but his eyes were cold and calculating. "Yo, Grandma," he called out to Elena, the 72-year-old barista who helped Tommy during the morning rush. "4 large lattes. Make them hot. We don't have all day." Elena smiled patiently. "Of course, sir. Just a few minutes." Margaret watched over the edge of her book as the 4 men took over a corner table, their voices carrying across the quiet shop. They were discussing some kind of contract, something about target acquisition and asset protection. Private security, Margaret guessed. The world was full of former military types who'd gone into the private sector, trading their training for bigger paychecks and fewer rules. She'd always had mixed feelings about that industry. Some were legitimate professionals. Others were just thugs with better resumes. Elena brought their drinks over on a small tray, her hands shaking slightly with age and the weight. As she set down the first cup, her elbow caught the edge and hot coffee splashed across the table. Oh, I'm so sorry." Elena gasped, her accent thickening with distress. Please let me. The tall one. Margaret would learn later his name was Derrick Vaughn, exploded out of his chair. Are you kidding me? He shouted, jumping back as coffee dripped onto his designer jeans. You stupid old bat! Look what you did. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, Elena stammered, pulling napkins from her apron, her hands shaking worse now. Please, I'll get you another. Derrick's face was flushed, red veins standing out on his neck. Do you know how much these jeans cost? More than you make in a week, probably. Sir, please. Tommy was coming around the counter, moving fast despite his prosthetic. It was an accident. Let me. Let you what? Your employee just assaulted me with hot coffee. Derrick was in Elena's face now, towering over her, using his size to intimidate. In any civilized establishment, you'd be fired on the spot. Margaret felt something cold and familiar settle into her chest. She'd seen men like this before, men who thought size and aggression made them powerful, who got off on intimidating people who couldn't fight back. In her years training SEALs, she'd weeded out dozens of them, men who wanted to be shooters for the wrong reasons, who confused violence with strength. Elena was crying now, soft sobs she was trying to hide, and Tommy was trying to de-escalate, offering refunds and free drinks, anything to calm the situation. That's when Margaret stood up. Son, she said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness. She apologized, multiple times. Let it go. The coffee shop went silent. Everyone turned to look at her, this small, gray-haired woman in mom jeans and a faded navy sweatshirt holding a paperback novel. Derrick's eyes locked onto her, and she saw the calculation happen. Old woman, small, non-threatening, easy target. Mind your business, Grandma, he said, his voice dripping with contempt. This doesn't concern you. It concerns everyone here, Margaret replied, still calm, still quiet. You're making a scene over an accident. Act like an adult and move on. One of Derrick's companions, a shorter man with a shaved head and a neck tattoo, laughed. Dude, are you gonna let some old lady talk to you like that? Something flickered in Derrick's eyes, embarrassment maybe, or wounded pride. He took a step toward Margaret, and she saw the exact moment he decided to escalate. What are you gonna do about it? He asked, moving into her space, trying to use his height advantage. You gonna teach me a lesson? You and what army old lady? Margaret didn't move. Didn't step back. She'd faced down enemy combatants, insurgents with AK-47s, men who'd literally wanted to kill her. This petulant child throwing a tantrum didn't register as a threat in any meaningful sense. But she knew what was coming. She'd seen it too many times before. Just walk away, she said softly. Whatever you're thinking of doing, it's not worth it. That was the wrong thing to say, or maybe the right thing. Years later, Margaret would wonder if some part of her had known exactly what she was doing, if she'd deliberately pushed the button that would set everything in motion. Derrick's hand shot out and shoved her hard, both palms against her shoulders. Margaret let herself go with it, her back slamming into the wall behind her. The impact knocked the air from her lungs, but she'd been hit harder during training exercises. She stayed on her feet, her eyes never leaving his face. Derrick, man, maybe... One of his companions started, but Derrick was beyond listening now. You want to play hero, old woman? He was right in her face now, close enough that she could smell the cologne he wore, expensive and cloying. You want to stand up for the help? Fine. Let me show you what happens to people who don't know their place. His hand came up, and Margaret had maybe half a second to make a choice. She could block it. Her muscle memory knew a dozen ways to deflect the strike counter. It put him on the ground before he knew what happened. She'd trained in Krav Maga Marine Corps martial arts program and several classified close combat systems that didn't have names because they weren't supposed to exist. But blocking it meant revealing herself, and revelation meant losing the advantage. So she took the hit. Derrick's palm caught her across the cheek with a crack that silenced the entire coffee shop. Margaret's head snapped to the side, her silver hair breaking loose from its clip. She tasted copper blood from where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. Her lips split, a thin line of red trickling down her chin. The pain was sharp but manageable. She'd had worse during training accidents, during the one combat deployment they'd sent her on, despite regulations during the car accident that had killed her husband 12 years ago and left her with a steel rod in her left femur. What registered more than the pain was the calculation, the angle of the strike, the force behind it, the way Derrick's West Point class ring had caught the light just before impact. "Die, old lady!" Derrick screamed, his fist already rising for a follow-up strike. That's when Tommy got between them, his voice hard with anger Margaret had never heard before. "Get out! Now! Or I'm calling the cops!" Derrick laughed, stepping back, his hands up in mock surrender. "Relax, old man. I was just teaching Grandma here some manners. She should be grateful most people charge for lessons like that." His three companions were laughing now, feeding off his energy. Though Margaret noticed one of them, the youngest, maybe 24 or 25, looked uncomfortable, his laughter forced. "Get out!" Tommy had his phone up, fingers hovering over 911. We're going. Derrick pulled out his wallet, threw a 50 on the counter. "For the coffee, keep the change. Buy yourself a better class of customer." As they headed for the door, Derrick paused next to Margaret. She was still standing against the wall, one hand pressed to her bleeding lip, her pale blue eyes watching him with an intensity that should have warned him. Should have, but didn't. "Next time, mind your business," he said quietly, his voice pitched low so only she could hear. "You might not be so lucky." Then he was gone, the door chiming behind him, the sound of their laughter fading as they headed to the black Range Rover parked outside. The coffee shop erupted into motion. Tommy was at Margaret's side immediately. Elena was sobbing and apologizing. Other patrons were offering napkins and ice and asking if she was okay. Margaret waved them off gently. "I'm fine. Really. Just a split lip." "Margaret, I'm calling the police," Tommy said firmly. "That was assault, clear as day. Everyone here saw it." "No police." Her voice was quiet, but final. "Ghosty hit you. He can't just—" "No, police." She met Tommy's eyes, and he saw something there that made him stop arguing. "Trust me, Tommy. This doesn't need to be official." She accepted a bag of ice and a handful of napkins, cleaned herself up in the bathroom, and then quietly left, ignoring everyone's protests. She had calls to make, and she didn't need an audience for them. Outside, she sat in her Honda Civic for a full 5 minutes, breathing slowly, controlling the adrenaline spike that always came after physical confrontation, even minor ones. Her hands were steady on the steering wheel. Good. Some things you never lose. Then she pulled out her cell phone, a basic flip phone. Nothing fancy, and dialed a number from memory. It rang 3 times before a rough voice answered. "Whoever this is, it's 0700 on a Saturday. Someone better be dead." "Hawk," Margaret said, using the call sign of Commander Jake Hawk Morrison, current head of the Navy SEAL sniper training program at Coronado. "It's Ghost." There was a pause, and then the irritation vanished from Morrison's voice, replaced by warmth and respect. "Ghost. Holy hell, I haven't heard from you in 6 months. How are you? How's retirement treating you?" "That depends. How would you like to help me teach someone a lesson?" Another pause, this one more thoughtful. "What kind of lesson are we talking about?" "The kind you can't teach in a classroom." Margaret dabbed at her lip with a napkin, wincing slightly. "I need information on someone. Former military, probably. Young, fit, arrogant as hell. Driving a black Range Rover, California plates." She rattled off the license number. She'd memorized it automatically, another old habit. "You going to tell me what this is about?" "Eventually. First, I need to know who I'm dealing with." "Ghost, if someone's threatening you." "No one's threatening me, Hawk. But someone made a mistake today. A big one. And I'm going to make sure he understands exactly what that mistake cost him." She could hear the smile in Morrison's voice. "You know, I always told my students you were the most dangerous person on any range. Not because you were the best shot, though you were, but because you were the most patient. You'd wait forever for the perfect shot." "Patience is a weapon," Margaret said, echoing the phrase she'd told Morrison himself 20 years ago, when he was just a lieutenant going through sniper training. The target doesn't know it's being hunted until it's already dead. "Give me 2 hours, Morrison said. "I'll call you back." Margaret ended the call and started her car. 2 hours. That gave her time to go home, clean up properly, and start planning. As she drove through the San Diego streets, she passed the black Range Rover parked outside a gym. Through the window, she could see Derrick and his friends laughing, working out, probably already forgetting about the old woman he'd hit in a coffee shop. That was good. Let him forget. Let him think he'd gotten away with it. Margaret had learned a long time ago that the most effective shots were the ones the target never saw coming. By 0900, Margaret was home sitting at her kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee and her laptop open. The house was small but meticulously maintained 3 bedrooms. One she used, one that was her husband David's old office, and now served as storage, and one that had been meant for children they'd never had. The walls held photos from her military career, though you had to know what you were looking at to understand them. There she was, at 22, fresh from MIT, with a degree in applied mathematics and a commission from ROTC. There at 25, finishing her first assignment as a marksmanship instructor. There at 30, standing with the first SEAL class she'd trained, the only woman in a sea of men. And there her favorite photo at 41, receiving her 3rd Navy Commendation Medal from an admiral who'd told her, "You've trained the operators who've taken down more high-value targets than anyone else in naval history. Some of those targets don't exist in any official record. You've saved thousands of lives with the skills you've passed on. The Navy owes you a debt it can never repay." She'd retired at 52, not because she wanted to, but because the injuries from the car accident, the one that had killed David, instantly, when a drunk driver ran a red light, had made it impossible to maintain the physical standards required for her position. They'd offered her desk jobs, advisory positions, but Margaret had always believed you couldn't teach shooting without being able to demonstrate it yourself. So she'd retired, taken her pension, and spent 6 years trying to figure out what to do with herself. Now, for the first time in 6 years, she felt something close to purpose. Her phone rang at exactly 1100 hours, Morrison punctual as always. "His name's Derrick Vaughn," Morrison said without preamble. "Former Marine Corps Sergeant, dishonorable discharge 4 years ago. Official reason, conduct unbecoming. Unofficial reason, excessive force during a civilian interaction in Okinawa. Beat the hell out of a bartender who supposedly shortchanged him. The Corps wanted him gone before he became an international incident. Criminal charges. The Marines paid off the bartender, made it go away. But yeah, it should have been criminal. After that, Vaughn started a private security company called Apex Tactical Solutions. They do personal protection, executive security, that kind of thing. On paper, they're legitimate. In practice." Morrison paused. "Word through the veteran community is they're thugs with good PR. 3 different assault complaints filed against Vaughn or his employees in the last 2 years, all mysteriously dropped. Money. Or intimidation. Maybe both. Vaughn's got connections. His father is Harold Vaughn, real estate developer. Rich as hell. Bought his way out of the draft during Vietnam by having a friendly doctor diagnose him with bone spurs. The son's been trading on the father's money and reputation his whole life." Margaret processed this, her mind already working through angles. "His company. How's business?" "Thriving, actually. He's got a demonstration scheduled for this afternoon at the Rancho Vista shooting range. Courting investors, trying to expand. Word is he's going after government contracts, maybe even military training programs." That stopped Margaret cold. "He wants to train military personnel. That's the rumor. Claims his tactical expertise and combat experience make him uniquely qualified. Which is bullshit. He spent most of his time in the Marines on base, maybe saw 6 months of actual deployment, and spent most of that behind a desk. But he's good at selling himself." "When's the demonstration?" 1400 hours. It's invitation only, but..." Morrison paused. "Ghost, I can get you in. One of my guys is supposed to attend evaluate their program. I can send you instead as a consultant. Do it." "What are you planning?" Margaret smiled, though there was no humor in it. "I'm going to give Mr. Vaughn a demonstration of my own. Show him what real expertise looks like. Ghost, be careful. Vaughn's got money lawyers. He could make trouble for you." "Let him try." Margaret's voice was soft, almost gentle. "Hawk, how many of your snipers have I trained over the years?" "Personally, maybe 300. If you count the instructors you trained who went on to train others, thousands. And how many of those would consider me a friend? Morrison laughed. All of them, every single one. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that Mr. Vaughn is about to learn an important lesson about respect, and about what happens when you mistake invisibility for weakness. After she ended the call, Margaret sat for a long moment staring at the photo of her and David on their wedding day. He'd been a Navy pilot killed not by enemy fire but by a drunk driver on a Tuesday afternoon in suburban San Diego. Random, meaningless, unjust. She'd spent 6 years being angry about that injustice, about the unfairness of a good man dying while drunk drivers got minimal sentences about a world that seemed to reward cruelty and punish kindness. And now here was Derrick Vaughn, another entitled bully, another man who thought violence made him powerful, hitting old women in coffee shops and laughing about it. Maybe she couldn't fix the world's injustices. Maybe she couldn't bring David back or make drunk drivers face real consequences. But she could do something about Derrick Vaughn. At 13:30 hours, Margaret pulled into the parking lot of Rancho Vista Shooting Range. It was a high-end facility, the kind that catered to wealthy gun enthusiasts and tactical hobbyists. The kind of place that charged $300 for an afternoon of shooting and called it an experience. She'd dressed carefully for this gray slacks, a cardigan, sensible shoes. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun. She wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked exactly like what she was, a 58-year-old woman, unremarkable and invisible. Perfect. Inside, about 30 people milled around the main room, mostly men in their 40s and 50s, wealthy, judging by their clothes and watches. A few women, mostly younger, probably assistants or partners. They held champagne glasses and made polite conversation while waiting for the demonstration to begin. Margaret accepted a glass of sparkling water from a server and drifted toward the back of the group, observing. Derrick Vaughn held court at the center of the room, the clear star of the show. He'd changed into tactical pants and a tight black t-shirt with Apex Tactical across the chest. His 3 companions from the coffee shop flanked him, his entourage, Margaret supposed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Derrick's voice carried across the room, practiced and smooth. "Thank you for joining us today. What you're about to see isn't just marksmanship, it's tactical excellence. It's the kind of training that produces results in the real world, not just on a range." He went on talking about his company, his vision, his experience. Margaret tuned it out, studying instead the 3 men with him. The one with the neck tattoo, Cole, she'd learned from Morrison's follow-up text, stood closest, clearly the second in command. He had that same cold, calculating look as Derrick, like violence was always just below the surface. The other 2 were harder to read. One was older, maybe 35, quiet and watchful. The youngest, the one who'd looked uncomfortable at the coffee shop, stood slightly apart, his expression difficult to decipher. "Now," Derrick said, gesturing toward the range visible through the large windows. "Let's go outside and I'll show you what Apex Tactical is capable of." The group moved outside onto the range itself. Targets were set up at various distances, 100 yards, 200s, 300, 500. A spotter stood ready with binoculars and a laptop showing target camera feeds. Derrick made a show of checking his rifle, a high-end precision weapon that probably cost more than Margaret's car. He settled into position, and Margaret had to admit grudgingly that his form wasn't terrible. The Marines had taught him the basics, at least. He fired 5 shots at the 100-yard target. All hits clustered around the center, respectable if not impressive. The crowd applauded politely. At 200 yards, Derrick continued, moving to the next station. 5 more shots. 4 hits, 1 just outside the scoring ring. The crowd applauded again, more enthusiastically this time. He continued to 300 yards, talking the entire time about breath control and trigger squeeze and other fundamentals that Margaret had been teaching for longer than he'd been alive. At 300 yards, he hit 3 out of 5 shots. The crowd oohed and awed like this was remarkable. Margaret sipped her water and said nothing. "Now," Derrick said, standing and addressing the crowd with a smile. "I know what some of you are thinking. That's great, but what about in real-world conditions? Well, let me tell you about the time we provided protection detail for a client in Kabul." He launched into a story that Margaret immediately recognized as embellished, if not outright fabricated. She'd heard thousands of war stories over the years. She knew the difference between truth and fiction, between experience and borrowed valor. Around her, though, the crowd was eating it up. They wanted to believe this handsome, confident man was a warrior, a protector, someone whose services were worth their money. And that's when I realized, Derrick was saying, true tactical excellence isn't about shooting at stationary targets on a sunny day. It's about performing under pressure and chaos when lives are on the line. Interesting, Margaret said quietly. Her voice was soft enough that several people near her had to strain to hear, which meant everyone turned to look. Derrick's eyes locked onto her, and she saw the exact moment recognition hit. The old woman from the coffee shop. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm sorry, did you have a question, ma'am?" His tone was polite, but there was an edge underneath. "Not a question, just an observation." Margaret took another sip of water. "You talk a lot about pressure and chaos, but your demonstration has been entirely controlled. Stationary targets at known distances on a calm day with plenty of time to adjust. Don't you think that's a bit inconsistent with your claims?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Cole, standing beside Derrick, whispered something, probably warning him. But Derrick's ego was bigger than his judgment. "I appreciate the feedback," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "But unless you have experience in tactical operations, it's hard to understand the nuances of what we do." "You're right," Margaret said agreeably. "It is hard to understand. Maybe you could help me. For instance, at 300 yards, you hit 3 out of 5 shots. Is that your normal accuracy rate, or were you having an off day?" The question landed like a slap. Several people in this crowd tried to hide smiles. They might be tactical hobbyists, but they knew enough to recognize that 3 out of 5 at 300 yards was mediocre at best. Derrick's face flushed. "I hit 3 out of 5 at 300 yards in variable wind conditions using iron sights, which is more than most people could manage." "You were using a scope," Margaret corrected gently. "I was watching. And the wind is maybe 5 miles per hour, barely enough to register. But you're right that most people couldn't match that performance. I just wondered if that's the standard you're selling to potential clients." The crowd was watching now, sensing conflict, drawn to it the way people always are. "Tell you what," Derrick said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Why don't you show us how it's done? I'm sure someone with your extensive critique must have considerable experience." Cole was shaking his head, trying to signal Derrick to back off, but Derrick was beyond listening. Margaret could see it in his eyes, the same wounded pride from the coffee shop, the same need to prove himself, to dominate, to win. "I wouldn't want to presume," Margaret said, still in that soft, almost apologetic tone. "I insist." Derrick's smile was sharp and cruel. "In fact, let's make it interesting. You take one shot at the 300-yard target. If you hit it, I'll personally apologize for whatever you think I did wrong at the coffee shop this morning." So he did remember. Good. "And when you miss," he continued, his voice carrying to the entire crowd, "you admit you're just a bitter old woman who doesn't know what she's talking about. Deal." The youngest member of Derrick's team, the one who'd looked uncomfortable earlier, stepped forward. "Derrick, man, maybe—" "Shut up, Travis," Derrick snapped, never taking his eyes off Margaret. "Well, what do you say, Grandma, ready to put your money where your mouth is?" Margaret considered for a moment, as if thinking it over. In reality, she was calculating angles, assessing weapon options, planning her next 10 moves. "I have a counteroffer," she said finally. "Not 300 yards, 500. And not just one shot, 5 shots moving targets." The crowd gasped. Moving targets at 500 yards was extraordinarily difficult, even for experienced shooters. Derrick laughed, genuine disbelief in his voice. "Lady, do you have any idea what you're suggesting? Moving targets at 500 yards requires—" "I know what it requires." Margaret interrupted, her voice still soft, but with steel underneath. "Do you—" Something in her tone, something in her eyes, finally penetrated Derrick's ego. For just a second, doubt flickered across his face. But it was too late. He'd challenged her in front of 30 potential clients, and his pride wouldn't let him back down now. Fine, he said. 5 shots moving targets at 500 yards. When you embarrass yourself, I want you to apologize to everyone here for wasting their time. Deal. Margaret smiled, a small, genuine smile that somehow made her look more dangerous, not less. Deal. The rangemaster, a weathered man in his 60s with the bearing of retired military, stepped forward with a clipboard. Ma'am, I need to verify you've signed our liability waiver and... She signed it when she came in, Jim, called out a voice from the back of the crowd. Margaret turned to see a tall man in his early 40s, athletic build, close-cropped hair. He wore civilian clothes, but everything about him screamed active-duty military. Derrick's eyes narrowed. And you are Lieutenant Commander Ryan Nash, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Nash pushed through the crowd, his eyes fixed on Margaret with something that looked like recognition mixed with disbelief. Ma'am, I need to ask, are you Margaret Carson? The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Margaret met his eyes and gave the slightest nod. Nash's face split into a grin. Holy hell, ghost! He turned to the crowd, his voice carrying authority. Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to witness something special. This woman trained me 13 years ago at Coronado. She's the reason I'm still alive. Trained you in what? Someone in the crowd asked. Everything that matters, Nash replied. But specifically, she taught me that the difference between a good sniper and a great one isn't the equipment or the conditions. It's patience, precision, and the ability to make impossible shots look routine. Derrick's face had gone from flushed to pale. Wait, you're saying she's military? Was military, Margaret corrected quietly. Retired 6 years ago. She's being modest, Nash said. Margaret Ghost Carson. 24 years as the Navy's primary sniper instructor. 3 Navy Commendation Medals. Training record that's still unbroken. She personally trained over 300 SEAL snipers, including some whose names you'll never know because their operations are still classified. The crowd was buzzing now, phones coming out, people whispering. Margaret saw Derrick's second-in-command, Cole, frantically typing on his phone, probably searching her name. Travis, the youngest of Derrick's crew, spoke up, his voice uncertain. The ghost. Like the actual ghost from the SEAL sniper program, I thought that was a legend. I heard stories when I was in basic, but nobody... Not a legend, Nash interrupted. Very real. And the stories don't do her justice. Margaret held up a hand. That's enough, Commander. I'm retired. This is Mr. Vaughn's demonstration, not mine. I'm just here to take a few shots, nothing more. But the damage was done. The entire dynamic had shifted. The crowd was looking at her differently now, with respect and curiosity instead of dismissive amusement. And Derrick. Derrick looked like a man who'd just realized he'd walked into a trap. 5 shots moving targets 500 yards, Margaret said, looking at him directly. Unless you'd like to reconsider the terms. She was giving him an out, a graceful way to back down, to laugh it off, to save face. Part of her, the part that still believed in mercy, hoped he'd take it. He didn't. No, Derrick said, his voice tight. We had a deal. Let's see what you've got, Ghost. He turned the call sign into an insult, drawing it out mockingly. Margaret nodded once. Jim, can you set up the moving target system at 500 yards, 5 targets, randomized speed and direction, standard SEAL qualification parameters? The rangemaster's eyebrows shot up. Ma'am, those parameters are designed for active duty operators using weapons they've trained with extensively. You're talking about... I know what I'm talking about, Margaret said gently. Can you set it up? Jim looked at Nash, who nodded. Do it. And Jim, record everything. This needs to be documented. While the range crew set up the targets, Margaret approached the weapons rack. Derrick had been using a custom precision rifle, probably $20,000 worth of optics and modifications. Margaret ran her hand along the rifles available, finally selecting a standard Remington 700, the workhorse of military snipers for decades. Basic, reliable, nothing fancy. You're not going to use the competition rifle? Derrick asked, unable to hide the sneer in his voice. Afraid it'll show up your limitations. I prefer tools I understand, Margaret replied. She checked the weapon. With practiced efficiency, chamber clear magazine, seated scope zeroed for 100 yards. It would need adjustment for 500, but that was simple mathematics. Cole had finished his phone search. He moved close to Derrick, showed him the screen. Margaret couldn't see what it displayed, but she watched Derrick's face go through a series of expressions: disbelief, anger, fear, and finally stubborn denial. "Doesn't matter," Derrick muttered. "She's old, retired 6 years. Probably can't even see the targets anymore, let alone hit them." Margaret heard every word. Her hearing, like everything else, had been trained to a razor's edge. "Targets are set," Jim called out. 5 moving targets at 500 yards, randomized patterns. They'll activate on your signal." Margaret moved to the shooting position, a simple bench rest with sandbags. She settled the rifle, feeling the familiar weight, the balance. It had been 6 years since she'd fired a weapon in any official capacity, but some things your body remembers the way it remembers breathing. The crowd had gone completely silent now. Even the wind seemed to have paused. "Before we begin," Nash said, pulling out his phone, "I'm going to call someone who'll want to see this, if that's all right, Ghost." Margaret glanced at him. "Who?" "Commander Morrison. He's at Coronado. We can video conference him in." "Hawk can watch from his office," Margaret said. "This isn't a spectacle." "Ma'am, with respect, this is absolutely a spectacle," Nash replied. "And every SEAL sniper instructor in the country is going to want to know about it." Margaret sighed but didn't object. Nash made the call, and within moments, Morrison's face appeared on the phone screen, which Nash propped up on a nearby table. "Ghost, is that you?" Morrison's voice came through tinny but clear. "Nash says you're about to shoot. What's going on?" "Just proving a point, Hawk," Margaret replied. "To who?" "Someone who needs to learn it." Morrison's laugh crackled through the speaker. "God, I've missed you. Okay, I'm recording this. Make it count." Margaret turned to Derrick. "Just to be clear on the terms, 5 shots, 5 moving targets at 500 yards. If I hit all 5, you apologize for this morning, publicly in front of everyone here. And if you miss even one," Derrick countered, "you apologize for wasting everyone's time and admit you're just a washed-up has-been living on Old Glory." "Agreed." Margaret settled into position behind the rifle. "Jim, activate the targets." The mechanical whir of motors carried across the range as 5 targets, standard human silhouettes, began moving on automated tracks at 500 yards. The system was designed to simulate unpredictable movement patterns, exactly the kind of challenge real-world snipers faced. At 500 yards, the targets looked impossibly small. Even with the scope, hitting a stationary target at that distance required skill and precision. Hitting a moving target required something else entirely. An almost supernatural ability to calculate trajectory, weigh target speed, and a dozen other variables in the split second before you pulled the trigger. Margaret's world narrowed to the scope view. Everything else fell away. The crowd, Derrick's sneering face, her own anger and pain from the morning. There was only the target, the wind, the mathematics of death. Her first breath out, and the rifle spoke. The crack echoed across the range. 500 yards away, the leftmost target's chest erupted in a spray of paper and backing material. "Hit center mass," Jim called out, binoculars to his eyes. "Target 1 eliminated." The crowd murmured, but Margaret was already tracking the second target, her calculations automatic, instinctive. Target moving left to right, speed, approximately 15 miles per hour. Wind quartering from the east at 7 miles per hour. Barometric pressure, standard temperature, 72 degrees Fahrenheit. The rifle cracked again. "Hit center mass," Jim called. "Target 2 eliminated." Margaret heard someone in the crowd whisper, "Jesus Christ, she's not even taking time to aim." But she was aiming. She was just doing it faster than they could perceive, muscle memory and mental calculation merging into something that looked like instinct, but was actually the product of tens of thousands of hours of practice. Third target, moving erratically, changing direction every 3 seconds. This one was harder designed to be nearly impossible to predict. Margaret watched it for 2 full seconds, identified the pattern. There was always a pattern, even in randomness, and took the shot on the direction change. "Hit center mass." Jim's voice had taken on a note of awe. "Target 3 eliminated." The 4th target was moving away the hardest shot because the distance was constantly increasing. Margaret compensated for the additional drop, led the target by an extra half mil, and fired. "Hit upper chest," Jim called. "Target 4 eliminated." 1 left. Margaret tracked it through the scope, watched it move in its programmed pattern, and in that moment she made a decision. The first 4 shots had been center mass, exactly what you'd expect from a trained sniper. The 5th shot was going to be something else. She waited. Let the target complete 1 full cycle of its movement pattern. Let the crowd start to wonder if she was struggling with the last one. Let Derrick start to hope she might miss. Then, as the target reached the far left of its track and began to turn, Margaret aimed for the head. The rifle cracked one last time. 500 yards away, the target's head snapped back, a perfect hit exactly where the brain would be on a human. The range went absolutely silent. "Target 5 eliminated," Jim said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Headshot." Then the crowd erupted. People were shouting, applauding. Several were on their phones already, no doubt sharing what they'd just witnessed. Nash was laughing, shaking his head in disbelief. Morrison's voice came through the phone speaker, saying something about "still got it" and "unbelievable." Margaret stood, cleared the rifle, and handed it back to Jim with a quiet, "Thank you." Then she turned to Derrick. He was standing frozen, his face ashen, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Cole and the older member of his crew had stepped slightly away from him, distancing themselves. Only Travis remained close, his expression caught between admiration for Margaret and concern for his employer. 5 for 5, Margaret said quietly. "I believe we had an agreement." Derrick's jaw worked, but no sound came out. The crowd was watching now, waiting, phones still recording. "Say it," Nash said, his voice hard. "You made a deal in front of witnesses. Honor it." Derrick started, then stopped. His eyes darted around, looking for an escape route, a way out. Those targets were rigged. Had to be. Nobody shoots like that, not at her age, not after 6 years retired. "Are you suggesting I cheated?" Margaret's voice was still soft, but there was iron underneath. "I'm suggesting this whole thing was a setup. You and Nash probably planned this, rigged the targets, made me look bad in front of—" "Stop," Travis interrupted, stepping forward. His voice shook slightly, but he looked Derrick in the eye. "Just stop, man. She made the shots. Everyone here saw it. You lost. Just be a man about it." "Shut your mouth, Travis," Cole snarled. "You don't talk to Mr. Vaughn like—" "No, he's right," said a voice from the crowd. An older man, distinguished-looking in an expensive suit, stepped forward. "I'm Robert Chen. I own a venture capital firm in La Jolla. I came here today because Mr. Vaughn promised an impressive demonstration of tactical expertise. Well, I got one, just not from him." He looked at Derrick with something close to contempt. "You challenged this woman, made a public wager, and lost decisively. The honorable thing would be to acknowledge that and apologize as agreed." "I don't need lectures on honor from—" Derrick began, but Chen cut him off. "I was considering investing $2 million in your company, Mr. Vaughn. That investment is now off the table, not because you lost a shooting competition, but because you lack the integrity to honor your word." He turned to the crowd. "I suspect I'm not the only one reconsidering their position." Several other people nodded. A woman in business attire spoke up. "I represent the Carlyle Group. We were discussing a security contract. That discussion is over." Margaret watched the dominoes fall one by one as the investors who'd come to see Derrick's demonstration instead saw his true character. She felt no satisfaction in it, only a weary kind of sadness. This could have been avoided so easily. All he'd had to do was be decent to an old woman in a coffee shop. "This is bullshit." Derrick finally exploded. "You people came here to see tactical excellence, and I showed you exactly that. So I lost one stupid shooting contest to some washed-up instructor living in the past. That doesn't change the fact that Apex Tactical is the premier security company in—" "You hit her," Travis said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. "What?" Derrick's voice was dangerous. "This morning, at the coffee shop. I was there." Travis's hands were shaking, but he didn't back down. "You hit this woman because she told you to stop yelling at an old lady who spilled your coffee. You hit her hard enough to split her lip and make her bleed. And then you laughed about it." The crowd's mood shifted again, shock replacing curiosity. Margaret saw phones turning toward Travis, recording his confession. Travis, you need to shut up right now, Cole warned. But Travis shook his head. No, I'm done shutting up. I'm done pretending this is okay. He looked at Margaret, his eyes bright with something that might have been tears. Ma'am, I'm sorry. I should have stopped him. I should have helped you. I didn't, and I felt sick about it all day. You were afraid, Margaret said simply. I understand that. Being afraid isn't an excuse for letting someone get hurt. Travis turned back to Derrick. I quit. I'm done working for you, done being part of this. My dad didn't raise me to stand by and watch women get hit. You walk away now, you'll never work in this industry again, Derrick threatened. I'll make sure of it. Then I'll work in a different industry, Travis replied. Anything's better than this. He walked away, pushing through the crowd toward the parking lot. Margaret watched him go, saw the set of his shoulders, the determination in his stride. That young man would be all right, she thought. He'd found his line and chosen not to cross it. Nash stepped forward, his phone still in hand, Morrison's face still visible on the screen. Mr. Vaughn, I need to inform you that this entire interaction has been recorded and will be filed with the appropriate authorities. Assault on a civilian is a serious crime. The fact that the victim happens to be a decorated retired naval instructor makes it even more serious. She refused to press charges. Derrick shot back. I already checked. This morning she told the coffee shop owner no police. That means no crime, no charges. That was this morning, Margaret said. I've had time to reconsider. She pulled out her phone, showed the screen a text message conversation with Tommy from the coffee shop. Tommy's security cameras recorded everything. The video shows clear unprovoked assault. He's already sent copies to the San Diego Police Department, along with contact information for the dozen witnesses who saw it happen. Derrick's face went from pale to gray. You planned this. All of this. The coffee shop coming here, the shooting demonstration. You set me up. No, Margaret corrected. You set yourself up. I just gave you multiple opportunities to make better choices. You chose not to take them. Morrison's voice came through Nash's phone. Derrick Vaughn. I'm Commander Jake Morrison, head of SEAL sniper training at Naval Special Warfare Command. I'm going to share this recording with every military contracting officer I know. You wanted to train military personnel. That's never going to happen. Your name is going to be poison in the defense community. Additionally, Nash added, I'm filing a formal complaint with the California Bureau of Security and Investigative Services. Your private security license is going to be reviewed. Given the assault charges and the pattern of complaints against your company, I'd estimate you have about a 30% chance of keeping it. Derrick looked around wildly, seeing his world collapse in real time. His investors were leaving, his employees were abandoning him, his reputation was being systematically destroyed. And all of it was being recorded, shared, going viral, even as they stood there. This isn't over, sir. He said, his voice shaking with rage and fear. You think you can destroy me? My father has lawyers' connections. We'll sue you for defamation, for harassment, for what? Margaret asked calmly. Defending myself against assault, accepting your challenge to a shooting competition and winning. Everything that's happened today, you initiated. Every consequence you're facing, you earned. I'll make you regret this, Derrick promised, taking a step toward her. Nash moved between them instantly, his hand on Derrick's chest. That sounded like a threat, Mr. Vaughn, in front of multiple witnesses. Would you like to add intimidation of a witness to your list of problems? Derrick shoved Nash's hand away, turned and stormed toward the parking lot. Cole followed after a moment's hesitation, shooting Margaret a look of pure hatred. The third member of their crew, the older quiet one, stayed behind. Ma'am, he said, approaching Margaret with his hands visible, non-threatening. I'm Marcus Webb, former Army 10 years. I want you to know I had no idea about the assault this morning. If I had, I wouldn't have been part of today's demonstration. But you stayed with him after Travis told everyone what happened, Margaret observed. Webb nodded slowly. I did. You're right. I should have walked out with Travis. He pulled a business card from his wallet, handed it to Margaret. That's got my contact information. If the police need a statement about Vaughn's character, his business practices, any of it, I'll cooperate fully. It's the least I can do. He left, and the crowd began to disperse, though several people stopped to shake Margaret's hand to thank her for what she'd done to ask if they could share the video of her shooting demonstration. She agreed to it all with quiet grace, though internally she was exhausted. When the last of them had gone, only she, Nash, and Jim, the rangemaster, remained. Morrison was still on the phone watching. "Ghost," Morrison said. "That was the most ruthlessly efficient takedown I've ever witnessed, and I've seen you qualify 300 snipers." "He gave me no choice," Margaret replied. "I tried to give him an out." "You did," Nash agreed. "Multiple outs. He chose pride over wisdom every time." He paused. "What happens now?" "Now I go home, file a police report, and let the system work." Margaret looked out at the 500-yard range where the target still hung in pieces. "Violence should always be the last resort. But when you have to use it, you use it decisively. That's what I taught your students, Commander. That's what I just demonstrated for Mr. Vaughn." "Will you press charges?" Morrison asked. "Yes, not for revenge, but for accountability. Men like Vaughn need to learn that actions have consequences. If I don't follow through, he learns the wrong lesson that he can get away with it as long as he apologizes under pressure." Nash nodded approvingly. "For what it's worth, that headshot on the 5th target, that was you sending a message." Margaret smiled slightly. "The first 4 shots proved I could do it. The 5th shot proved I chose not to make it easy on him." "Terrifying woman," Morrison said with obvious affection. "I'm glad you were on our side all these years." Margaret's phone buzzed. A text from Tommy at the coffee shop. "Police are here. They want to talk to you. Video is clear as day. That guy is done." Another text, this one from Travis. "Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. I'm sorry I didn't have it this morning." She responded to Tommy first. "On my way." Then to Travis. "You found it when it mattered. That's what counts." "I need to go," she told Nash and Morrison. "Thank you both for your help today." "Ghost," Morrison said seriously. "You know this isn't over, right? Vaughn's father has money and connections. He's going to fight back." "Let him," Margaret replied. "I've been fighting professionally for 24 years. I'm not afraid of lawyers." She drove back to San Diego in the late afternoon light, her hands steady on the wheel. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the familiar clarity that always came after action. She'd taken the shot metaphorically and literally, and now she'd face whatever consequences came from it. At the police station, she gave her statement to a detective named Sarah Chen, who handled her with professional courtesy, mixed with obvious respect. "Ma'am, I have to tell you, this is the clearest assault case I've seen in years," Chen said, showing Margaret the security footage from the coffee shop. "Multiple witnesses, video evidence, documented injury. Mr. Vaughn is going to have a very hard time defending this." "I just want it on record," Margaret said. "I want him to know that hitting someone has consequences even if that someone is an old woman he thought wouldn't fight back." "You did fight back," Chen observed, "just not in the way he expected." Margaret thought about that as she drove home in the gathering darkness. She'd spent her whole career teaching young men to fight, to shoot to kill, to survive in the worst conditions imaginable. But she'd also taught them something else, something that the best of them understood: violence was a tool, not a solution. You used it when necessary, but you never gloried in it, never let it define you. Derrick Vaughn had missed that lesson. He'd learned violence without discipline, aggression, without control. He'd become exactly the kind of operator she'd always refused to train dangerous, not because of skill, but because of lack of character. At home, she made herself dinner simple, efficient, like everything in her life. While she ate, her phone buzzed constantly. Messages from former students who'd seen the video, news requests for interviews, even a call from a journalist at the San Diego Tribune asking for comment. She ignored most of it, but she did respond to one message from Commander Morrison. "How are you holding up?" he'd written. "Fine," she replied. "Just tired." "You kicked a hornet's nest today, Ghost. Be careful." "I've been careful my whole life, Hawk. Maybe it's time to be something else." "Like what?" Margaret thought about that as she sat in her quiet kitchen, the house empty except for memories and photographs of a life spent in service. What did she want to be now at 58, retired from the only career she'd ever known? Visible. She finally typed back. For 6 years, I've been invisible. Maybe that was a mistake. She went to bed at 2200 hours, as she always did, but sleep didn't come easily. Her mind kept replaying the day, Derrick's hand connecting with her face, the rifle settling into her shoulder. Travis finding the courage to speak up, the look on Derrick's face when his world collapsed. Somewhere around midnight, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Is this Margaret Carson? A man's voice, older, cultured, with the kind of authority that came from wealth and power. Who's asking? Harold Vaughn. I'm Derrick's father. I think we need to talk. Margaret sat up in bed, her hand tightening on the phone. Harold Vaughn. She'd read about him during her research on Derrick, real estate developer, political donor, the kind of man who bought his way out of problems and expected the world to bend to his will. It's after midnight, Mr. Vaughn, she said quietly. Whatever you have to say can wait until morning. I don't think so. His voice was cold, controlled. You humiliated my son today. Destroyed his reputation, cost him millions in potential contracts, and now you're pressing criminal charges. I'm calling to offer you a settlement. I'm not interested in your money. Everyone's interested in money, Mrs. Carson. The question is just how much. Papers rustled on his end. I'm prepared to offer you $200,000. You drop the charges, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and we all move on with our lives. Margaret's laugh was sharp and humorless. Your son hit me in our coffee shop because I told him to stop berating an elderly woman. Now you're trying to buy my silence. You really don't understand how this works, do you? I understand perfectly. Harold's voice hardened. You're a retired military instructor living on a pension in a modest house in Claremont. $200,000 would change your life. All you have to do is let this go. No. $300,000. Final offer. Take it now or I withdraw it permanently. Mr. Vaughn, I spent 24 years training the most elite warriors in the world. I taught them that honor isn't negotiable, that integrity can't be bought, and that the moment you compromise your principles for convenience, you've lost everything that matters. She kept her voice level, almost gentle. Your money means nothing to me. Your son committed assault. He'll face the consequences. You're making a mistake. The threat in his voice was unmistakable now. I have lawyers who will bury you in paperwork for years. I have connections in the San Diego justice system who owe me favors. I can make your life very difficult, Mrs. Carson. It's Miss Carson. I'm a widow, and you're welcome to try. Margaret swung her legs out of bed, suddenly wide awake. But before you do, you should know something about me. I don't scare easily. I've had insurgents take shots at me in Afghanistan. I've had commanding officers try to force me out because they didn't think women belonged in combat training. I've buried a husband and kept going. Your lawyers and your connections don't frighten me. Then you're a fool. Maybe. But I'm a fool who's right, and that counts for something. She paused. Mr. Vaughn, let me give you some free advice. Your son has a problem. It's not me. It's not the charges. It's not the viral video. It's his character. He thinks violence makes him powerful. He thinks intimidation is strength. You've enabled that by fixing his problems instead of making him face them. If you really want to help him, stop protecting him from consequences and start teaching him accountability. Don't presume to tell me how to raise my son. Someone needs to. You've raised a man who hits old women and brags about it. That's on you as much as it's on him. Harold Vaughn's voice dropped to a whisper, somehow more menacing than if he'd shouted. You've just made an enemy of a very powerful family, Miss Carson. I promise you'll regret it. The line went dead. Margaret sat in the darkness of her bedroom, her heart rate elevated but her hands steady. She'd expected this, the attempt to buy her off or intimidate her into backing down. Men like Harold Vaughn didn't understand any other language. She got up, made herself a cup of tea, and sat at her kitchen table with her laptop. If Harold Vaughn wanted war, she'd give him one. But first she needed to understand exactly who she was fighting. 3 hours of research painted a clear picture. Harold Vaughn had built his fortune through real estate development, but his methods were questionable at best. Multiple allegations of bribery, several lawsuits from contractors he'd refused to pay, a pattern of environmental violations at his construction sites. He'd settled most of the cases out of court with non-disclosure agreements, using money to bury problems, just like he'd tried to do with her. His political donations were strategic, spread across both parties, buying influence wherever he could. He sat on the boards of 3 major San Diego charities, using philanthropy as a shield against criticism. The local press treated him as a civic leader, rarely mentioning the allegations that followed him like shadows. And Derrick was his only son, the heir to the empire, groomed from birth to take over the family business. No wonder the kid thought he was untouchable. Margaret's phone buzzed at 05:30, just as dawn was breaking. "Commander Morrison, tell me you didn't answer Harold Vaughn's call last night," he said without preamble. "How did you know about that?" "Because he called me at 0200 asking about you. Wanted to know your financial situation, your vulnerabilities, anything he could use as leverage." Morrison's voice was tight with anger. "I told him to go to hell, but Ghost, you need to be careful. This guy plays dirty." "So do I when I have to." "This isn't a shooting range. You can't win against Harold Vaughn with marksmanship." "No," Margaret agreed. "But I can win with patience and documentation, the 2 things I'm best at." Morrison was quiet for a moment. "What are you planning?" "Harold Vaughn has been buying his way out of problems for 40 years. His son learned that behavior from him. I'm going to show them both that some things can't be bought." She took a sip of her tea. "I'm going to let the system work, Hawk. File charges, testify if necessary, and let justice run its course. And if Harold tries to interfere, I'll document that too." "He threatened you, didn't he?" "Promised to make my life difficult with lawyers and connections in the justice system. That's witness intimidation. You should report it." "I recorded the call." Margaret pulled up the audio file on her phone. "I record all calls from unknown numbers. Old habit from when I was handling classified information." Morrison laughed, genuine delight in his voice. "God, you're terrifying. Remind me never to cross you." "You won't. You're one of the good ones, Hawk." After she hung up, Margaret forwarded the recording to Detective Sarah Chen with a brief explanation. Chen called back within 15 minutes. "Miss Carson, this is extremely helpful. Harold Vaughn offering money to drop charges, then threatening you when you refuse, that's textbook witness tampering. We can add that to the case file." "I don't want to add charges," Margaret said. "I just want it documented. If Harold escalates, we'll have a pattern of behavior on record." "Smart. Very smart." Chen paused. "Between you and me, Harold Vaughn has been getting away with this kind of thing for years. Nobody's ever stood up to him before. They always take the settlement. I'm not most people. Clearly." There was admiration in Chen's voice. "The assault case against Derrick is solid. We're filing formal charges this morning. He'll be arraigned within 48 hours. Given the video evidence and witness statements, the DA thinks we can get a conviction." "What kind of sentence are we looking at?" "First offense, assault causing injury. Probably 6 months to a year, possibly suspended if he pleads guilty and shows remorse. But the real damage will be the criminal record and the publicity." Margaret thanked her and ended the call. 6 months to a year seemed light for what Derrick had done, but she'd learned long ago that justice was imperfect. You took what you could get and hoped it was enough to change behavior. At 0800, her doorbell rang. Margaret checked the security camera, a man in his early 30s, expensive suit carrying a briefcase. She opened the door with the chain still engaged. "Margaret Carson." The man smiled, all polish and practiced charm. "My name is Jeffrey Chen. I'm an attorney with Vaughn and Associates. I'd like to speak with you about a legal matter." "Vaughn and Associates. Harold Vaughn's law firm." "Mr. Vaughn is one of our clients, yes, but I'm here in a professional capacity to discuss a potential resolution to no." Margaret started to close the door. "Miss Carson, please. Just 5 minutes of your time. I think you'll want to hear what I have to say." Something in his tone made her pause. She studied his face through the gap in the door. He looked nervous, she realized. Not threatening or arrogant like she'd expected from one of Harold's lawyers. Actually nervous. "5 minutes, she said. "On my front porch. The door stays chained." "That's fine." Jeffrey Chen pulled papers from his briefcase, held them up so she could see. These are settlement documents. Mr. Vaughn has authorized me to offer you $500,000 in exchange for dropping all charges against his son and signing a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. I already turned down $300,000. What makes you think I'd accept $500,000? Because I'm authorized to go higher if necessary. Jeffrey's voice dropped. Miss Carson, I need you to understand something. Harold Vaughn always gets what he wants. Always. The people who fight him lose, not because he's right, but because he has unlimited resources and no moral boundaries. He'll drag you through court for years. He'll investigate every aspect of your life looking for dirt. He'll make you wish you'd never heard the name Vaughn. Is this the part where you threaten me? No. Jeffrey's face was pale now, and Margaret realized he wasn't nervous about her. He was nervous about his employer. This is the part where I warn you. I've worked for Harold Vaughn for 3 years. I've seen what he does to people who cross him. A small business owner who sued him over a contract dispute bankrupted within a year. A journalist who wrote an unflattering profile lost her job after advertisers mysteriously pulled out. A city councilman who voted against one of his development projects, indicted on corruption charges that everyone knew were trumped up. He swallowed hard. Harold doesn't just win, he destroys. Then why are you warning me? Because you remind me of my grandmother. Jeffrey's voice cracked slightly. She was Navy too, Pearl Harbor survivor. She taught me that some things matter more than money or career advancement. When I took this job, I thought I'd be helping people resolve disputes. Instead, I'm helping a bully silence his victims. He pushed the papers toward her through the gap in the door. Take the money, Miss Carson, please. Save yourself while you still can. Margaret studied the young lawyer's face, saw genuine concern there mixed with shame. What's your grandmother's name? Was. She passed last year, Helen Chen. Served as a nurse at Pearl Harbor, then 30 more years at naval hospitals across the country. I'm sorry for your loss. Margaret's voice softened. Mr. Chen, I appreciate your warning. I can see it cost you something to give it, but I'm not taking the settlement. Miss Carson. Your grandmother survived Pearl Harbor. She served for 30 years in a military that didn't always value women's contributions. Do you think she'd want you working for a man like Harold Vaughn? Jeffrey Chen's face crumpled. No, she'd be ashamed of me. Then quit. Margaret said it simply as if it were the most obvious solution in the world. You're a lawyer. You can find other work. Work that doesn't make you complicit in bullying and intimidation. I have student loans. My wife is pregnant with our first child. I can't just... Yes, you can. It'll be hard, but you can. Margaret met his eyes. Your grandmother made hard choices every day. She chose service over comfort, principle over convenience. You have that same choice now. Make her proud. Jeffrey stared at her for a long moment, then carefully put the papers back in his briefcase. I should warn you, Mr. Vaughn won't stop with settlement offers. His next move will be to go after your reputation. He'll hire investigators, dig into your military record, talk to anyone who ever had a grudge against you. Let him dig. My record is clean. Nobody's record is completely clean. Jeffrey's voice was gentle, almost apologetic. Everyone has something they regret, some mistake they've made. Harold will find it and weaponize it. Margaret thought about her career, 24 years of training snipers. She'd been hard on her students because the job required it, because mistakes in the field meant death. Some had washed out of her program and probably hated her for it. Some had complained that she was too strict, too demanding, too inflexible. I've made plenty of mistakes, she said quietly. I've been harder than I needed to be sometimes. I've pushed students past their limits. I've said things in anger that I regretted later. But I never compromised on the standards because those standards kept people alive. She looked at Jeffrey. If Harold wants to dig that up and use it against me, so be it. I can live with my choices. Jeffrey nodded slowly, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. Not his law firm card, but a personal one, with just a name and phone number. If you change your mind, or if you need someone to testify about Harold's tactics, call me. I might not be brave enough to quit today, but I can at least refuse to participate in whatever he's planning next. He left and Margaret watched him walk to his car. His shoulders slumped with the weight of moral compromise. She hoped he'd find the courage to leave, but she knew from experience that hope wasn't always enough. Some people needed to hit bottom before they could change direction. At 1,000 hours, her phone rang again. This time, it was Nash. "Ghost? We have a problem. Derrick Vaughn just posted a video on social media. You need to see it." "Send me the link." The video loaded on her laptop, and Margaret felt her stomach tighten. Derrick sat in what looked like an expensive office. His face composed, his voice measured and reasonable. He'd clearly been coached. "I want to address the video that's been circulating of an incident at a shooting range yesterday," Derrick began. "First, I want to apologize to Miss Margaret Carson. I was wrong to challenge her the way I did, and I'm genuinely impressed by her marksmanship skills. She's clearly a talented shooter with an impressive military background." Margaret's eyes narrowed. This wasn't an apology, it was a setup. "However," Derrick continued, his expression shifting to concern, "I'm troubled by what happened after our shooting competition. Miss Carson and several individuals associated with naval special warfare have engaged in a coordinated campaign to destroy my reputation and my business. They've encouraged investors to withdraw funding, filed what I believe are baseless criminal charges, and spread misinformation about my military service and my company's practices." He paused, looking directly at the camera, with what Margaret recognized as practiced sincerity. "I believe this campaign is motivated by Miss Carson's resentment toward the private security industry. According to sources familiar with her military career, she has a history of hostility toward contractors and has made statements in the past suggesting she views private security work as mercenary activity unworthy of respect. When I inadvertently offended her by questioning her abilities at the range, which, again, I sincerely regret, she saw an opportunity to punish me for representing an industry she despises." Margaret's hands clenched into fists. He was spinning the narrative, turning her into the aggressor himself, into the victim. "The assault charges stem from an incident at a coffee shop where I admittedly lost my temper over poor service," Derrick continued. "I raised my voice, which I shouldn't have done. But the physical contact Miss Carson claims occurred is exaggerated at best. Several witnesses have come forward to say they saw no assault, just a heated verbal exchange." That was a lie. The video clearly showed him hitting her. But Margaret knew how this worked. Harold had probably paid off or intimidated witnesses to change their stories. "I'm asking Miss Carson to please end this vendetta." Derrick concluded, his voice taking on a pleading tone. "I've apologized for my behavior at the range. I'm willing to apologize again publicly for any distress I caused at the coffee shop. But these criminal charges and this campaign to destroy my livelihood are disproportionate and unjust. I hope we can resolve this like adults without further damage to either of our reputations." The video ended. Margaret sat back, processing what she'd just witnessed. It was masterful manipulation enough, admission of minor fault to seem reasonable enough, deflection and reframing to shift blame, enough emotional appeal to garner sympathy. Harold's lawyers had clearly crafted every word. Her phone buzzed with texts. "Morrison, don't respond yet. Let me talk to public affairs." Nash, "This is bullshit. Everyone knows what really happened." Detective Chen, "Video evidence contradicts his claims. Don't worry." But Margaret was worried not because she thought Derrick's lies would hold up in court, but because she understood how public perception worked. Most people wouldn't look at the evidence carefully. They'd see a young man apologizing and an older woman refusing to accept it, and they'd assume she was being vindictive. The phone rang, a number she didn't recognize, but she answered anyway. "Miss Carson, this is Amanda Price from the San Diego Tribune. I'm calling about the assault charges against Derrick Vaughn. Would you like to comment on his video statement?" "No comment at this time." "Mr. Vaughn claims you have a personal vendetta against the private security industry. Can you respond to that allegation?" "No comment." He also suggests the assault charges are exaggerated. The coffee shop owner, Tommy Rodriguez, declined to speak with us, and several witnesses we contacted said they don't recall seeing any physical violence. How do you respond to questions about whether the assault actually occurred?" Margaret's jaw tightened. The incident was recorded on security cameras. The evidence speaks for itself. Beyond that, I have no comment. But surely you understand how this looks from the outside. Ms. Price, I understand exactly how it looks. A wealthy family with expensive lawyers is trying to rewrite reality to protect their son from consequences. That's not new or surprising. What would be surprising is if journalists did their job and investigated the pattern of complaints against Mr. Vaughn's company or his father's history of using settlements and NDAs to silence critics, or the witness intimidation that's clearly happening right now. She kept her voice level. When you're ready to write that story, call me back. Until then, no comment. She ended the call and immediately dialed Detective Chen. I know, Chen said before Margaret could speak. Harold Vaughn's lawyers contacted several witnesses from the coffee shop, offered them money to reconsider their statements. Most refused, but a couple took the deal. Is that legal? Technically, they're not paying for false testimony. They're offering compensation for time and stress. It's a gray area. Chen's frustration was audible. But we still have the video. We still have Tommy's testimony, and we still have you. The case is solid. What about the witnesses who took money to change their stories? We'll note it in the case file. The defense will try to use them, but any decent prosecutor will shred their credibility on cross-examination. People who change their testimony after accepting money from the defendant's family, that doesn't play well with juries. After the call, Margaret sat in her quiet living room and allowed herself a moment of doubt. Not about whether she was right, she knew she was right, but about whether fighting was worth the cost. Harold Vaughn had unlimited resources and no scruples. She had a pension and a principal. In a straight fight that was a losing combination. But she'd never fought straight in her life. Her laptop was still open to Derrick's video. She watched it again this time, analyzing it like she would analyze a hostile position. What were the vulnerabilities? Where were the weak points? There, Derrick claimed multiple witnesses saw no assault. But Tommy's security footage showed a dozen people in the coffee shop at the time, all with clear lines of sight. If Harold had only managed to flip a couple of witnesses, that meant the others were holding firm. Those witnesses were her strongest defense. And there, Derrick's claim that she had a vendetta against private security. That was provably false. Her military record would show she'd worked with contractors on multiple occasions, had even recommended several private security firms for training contracts. Harold's lawyers were counting on nobody actually checking the facts. Margaret opened a new document and began typing. Not a response to Derrick's video, but a timeline. Every interaction, every threat, every attempted intimidation documented with dates, times, and supporting evidence. The midnight phone call from Harold recorded. The settlement offer from Jeffrey Chen documented. The witness tampering noted. The video evidence from the coffee shop preserved. She worked for 3 hours building an exhaustive record of everything that had happened. When she finished, she had a 20-page document that laid out the case not just against Derrick, but against his father's entire pattern of behavior. She sent copies to Detective Chen Commander Morrison and her own lawyer, a retired Navy JAG officer named Patricia Holloway, who she'd known for 15 years. Holloway called within the hour. Margaret, this is incredibly thorough, but I have to ask, what's your endgame here? You're not just defending yourself against assault charges. You're building a case against the entire Vaughn family. Maybe that's what needs to happen, Margaret said. Harold Vaughn has been buying his way out of accountability for 40 years. His son learned that behavior from him. If I just defend against Derrick's charges, Harold wins even if his son goes to jail. He'll just pay the fines, hire better PR, and go back to business as usual. And you want to change that. I want there to be consequences, real ones, the kind money can't fix. Holloway was quiet for a moment. You know this could backfire, right? If you go after Harold directly, he'll retaliate hard. He'll make Derrick's video look like gentle persuasion. Let him try. I'm not afraid of Harold Vaughn. You should be. I've seen him destroy people who crossed him. Good people with legitimate grievances, who thought justice would protect them. It didn't. Then maybe someone needs to stand up to him who can't be destroyed. Margaret's voice was firm. I'm 58 years old, widowed, retired. I don't have a career he can ruin or a family he can threaten. My reputation is based on 24 years of documented service, not public opinion. What exactly can he take from me? Your peace of mind, your safety, your life savings and legal fees. My peace of mind is already gone. It died with my husband 12 years ago. My safety, I've survived combat deployments and training accidents, and legal fees. Margaret smiled grimly. I'll represent myself if I have to. I've read enough military law to understand the basics. You're serious about this? Completely. Holloway sighed. Then I'm with you. Pro bono if necessary. Someone needs to stand up to that family, and if it's going to be a 58-year-old widow with a military pension, I want to be on her side. That afternoon, Margaret received an email from Travis Derrick's former employee who'd quit at the shooting range. Miss Carson, I don't know if you remember me, but I was with Derrick yesterday. I wanted you to know that I contacted the police and gave a formal statement about what happened at the coffee shop. I was there. I saw everything. Derrick hit you hard and then laughed about it. No matter what he's saying now, that's the truth. I also told them about other incidents I witnessed while working for Apex Tactical Times. Derrick used excessive force or threatened clients who complained about his services. I have documentation for some of it. The police said it would help establish a pattern of behavior. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I was afraid of losing my job and my reputation in the security industry. But after watching you stand up to him, I realized that keeping quiet was worse than any professional consequence. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like. Margaret read the email twice, feeling something warm and unfamiliar in her chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but something close to hope. Travis had found his courage. That mattered maybe more than whether Derrick went to jail. She responded, Travis, thank you for coming forward. What you did took real courage, and it will make a difference. As for your career in security, I know several legitimate firms who value integrity over connections. If you're interested, I can make some introductions. The industry needs people like you, people who understand that protecting others means having principles worth protecting. Stay strong. That evening, her doorbell rang again. Margaret checked the camera and felt her heart rate spike. Two men in suits, but these weren't lawyers. They had the bearing of law enforcement or military, the kind of controlled awareness that came from years of training. She opened the door, chain engaged. Can I help you? The older of the two men, probably mid-50s with graying hair, held up a badge. Miss Carson, I'm Special Agent Marcus Webb, FBI. This is my partner, Special Agent Lisa Torres. We'd like to speak with you about Harold Vaughn. Margaret's hand tightened on the door frame. What about him? We've been investigating his business practices for 18 months, Webb said. Wire fraud, tax evasion, witness tampering, bribery of public officials. We have a solid case, but we need someone willing to testify about his intimidation tactics. Someone he can't buy off or scare into silence. He met her eyes. We think that someone might be you. Margaret stared at the FBI badges, her mind racing through implications. 18 months of investigation meant this was serious federal-level prosecution. Harold Vaughn wasn't just a local bully. He was a target of a major criminal probe. Come in, she said, releasing the chain. But I need to see those badges up close, and I'm calling your field office to verify your identities before we talk about anything substantive. Webb smiled, genuine respect in his expression. Smart. I'd expect nothing less from someone with your background. He handed her his badge and credentials. Torres did the same. Margaret examined them carefully, noted the badge numbers, then called the San Diego FBI field office. The receptionist confirmed both agents were legitimate and currently assigned to financial crimes investigation. Only then did Margaret invite them to sit at her kitchen table. Coffee, she offered. Please, Torres said. She was younger than Webb, maybe 40, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Black, 2 sugars. Margaret made 3 cups, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. FBI involvement changed everything. This wasn't just about Derrick hitting her anymore. This was about bringing down an entire criminal enterprise. Webb pulled out a tablet once they were settled. Miss Carson, everything we discuss from this point forward is confidential. You cannot share it with anyone, including your lawyer, unless we give explicit permission. Do you understand? I understand. But before we go further, I need to know, is this conversation being recorded? Yes. Audio only, for documentation purposes. Webb showed her a small recording device on the table. Is that acceptable? Margaret nodded. Ask your questions. Torres opened a file on the tablet. Harold Vaughn called you at 0035 hours this morning. Can you tell us what was discussed? So they'd been monitoring Harold's communications. That meant wiretaps probably authorized by a federal judge. The investigation was further along than she'd realized. He offered me money to drop the assault charges against his son, Margaret said. Started at $200,000, went up to $300 when I refused. When I turned him down again, he threatened me. Said he had lawyers and connections in the justice system who could make my life difficult. Did you record the call? Yes, I sent it to Detective Chen at SDPD this morning. Webb and Torres exchanged glances. That's helpful, Webb said. Very helpful. But here's what you don't know. Harold Vaughn has been systematically bribing city officials, judges, and law enforcement officers for at least a decade. We have evidence of cash payments, offshore accounts, favors exchanged. The corruption goes deep. Margaret felt something cold settle in her stomach. Detective Chen is clean, Torres interrupted. We vetted her thoroughly before allowing this case to proceed through SDPD, but others in the department aren't. Harold has contacts who could make evidence disappear. Witnesses change their stories. Charges get reduced or dismissed. So you're using me as bait, Margaret said flatly. You want Harold to come after me so you can catch him in the act of witness intimidation, add it to your case against him. Webb didn't deny it. We want to document his pattern of criminal behavior. The assault case against Derrick is legitimate, but it's also an opportunity. Harold can't help himself. He always overreaches when someone defies him. If we can catch him bribing officials, tampering with witnesses, or threatening violence, it strengthens our entire case. And if he succeeds in intimidating me, if he actually hurts me, we have surveillance on you and on Harold, Torres said. Round the clock. If he makes any move toward violence, we'll intervene immediately. You have surveillance on me, Margaret's voice hardened, without my knowledge or consent. For your protection, Webb said quickly. Look, Miss Carson, we know Harold's playbook. When money doesn't work, he escalates. The people who've stood up to him before, they've ended up with slashed tires, break-ins, assault. One man who testified against him in a civil suit ended up in the hospital with 2 broken legs. Said he fell downstairs. We think Harold's people pushed him. Margaret processed this, her tactical mind working through angles. So you want me to be a target, draw Harold out, get him to commit crimes you can prove, help you build a RICO case or whatever you're putting together. That's blunt, but essentially accurate, Webb acknowledged. With one important distinction, you're already a target. Harold's already escalated by calling you at midnight and threatening you. We're just asking you to stay the course. Let him make mistakes while we document everything. What's in it for me? Torres leaned forward. Justice. Real justice. Harold Vaughn has destroyed lives, corrupted institutions, and walked away clean every single time. You have a chance to stop that. Not just for yourself, but for every person he's victimized over the years. And if I say no, then we respect your decision, Webb said. We'll continue our investigation without your active cooperation. But I'll be honest, without a witness willing to testify about Harold's intimidation tactics, especially someone as credible as you, our case gets weaker. He'll probably skate on reduced charges, pay some fines, maybe do a year in minimum security if we're lucky. Then he goes right back to business as usual. Margaret stood and walked to the window, looking out at her quiet street. She'd lived here for 6 years, anonymous and invisible, trying to find peace after David's death and her forced retirement. Now she was standing at a crossroads. She could back down, take whatever settlement Harold eventually offered, and return to that quiet invisibility. Or she could fight, knowing it would cost her, that peace possibly cost her much more. My husband died 12 years ago, she said quietly, not turning around. Drunk driver ran a red light, T-boned his car at 60 miles an hour. Killed him instantly. The driver survived barely. Got 5 years for vehicular manslaughter, out in 3 for good behavior. I'm sorry, Torres said, and sounded like she meant it. I spent years being angry about that, about the injustice of it. David was a good man, a decorated Navy pilot, someone who'd risked his life for his country. and he died because some drunk couldn't call a cab. 5 years seemed like nothing, like the justice system valued his life at less than a used car. She turned back to face them. I can't fix that. I can't bring David back or make drunk drivers face proportional consequences. But maybe I can help fix this. Maybe I can help make sure Harold Vaughn faces real accountability for once in his miserable life. Webb's face was carefully neutral. So you'll cooperate. On one condition. You tell me everything. The scope of your investigation, what you have on Harold, what you still need. I won't be a passive victim waiting for you to rescue me. If I'm going to be part of this, I'm going to be an active participant. Torres looked at Webb, who hesitated. Most of what we're investigating is classified. Grand jury testimony, sealed indictments. I held a top-secret clearance for 22 years, Margaret interrupted. I've forgotten more about operational security than most people ever learn. Tell me what I need to know or I walk right now. Another long look between the agents. Then Webb nodded. All right, but this doesn't leave this room. He opened his tablet and pulled up a complex chart showing financial flows and relationships. Harold Vaughn has been running a criminal enterprise for 15 years. Real estate development is his legitimate business, but he's used it as a front for money laundering, fraud, and corruption. He takes bribes from foreign investors to get their money into the U.S. real estate market. He bribes city officials to get permits and zoning changes. He defrauds contractors and uses the savings to fund political campaigns, which buy him more influence. Torres took over. We've identified 47 separate instances of bribery, 23 cases of fraud, and at least a dozen episodes of witness intimidation. The total financial damage is estimated at over $200 million. But here's the problem. Harold's very good at insulating himself. He uses intermediaries, shell companies' offshore accounts. We can prove the crimes happened, but connecting them directly to Harold is harder. That's where witness testimony comes in, Webb continued. People who've experienced Harold's intimidation firsthand, who can testify that he personally threatened them or offered them bribes. We have 3 witnesses so far, but they're all compromised. Prior criminal records, financial problems, credibility issues. You're different. You're a decorated military veteran with an impeccable record. When you testify that Harold Vaughn called you at midnight and threatened you, a jury will believe it. Margaret studied the chart, her mind automatically organizing the information into patterns. You said foreign investors. Which countries? Torres glanced at Webb, who nodded permission. China primarily, Russia, several Middle Eastern nations. They use Harold's real estate projects to move money into the U.S., avoid sanctions, hide assets from their own governments. Harold takes a cut and asks no questions. That's not just financial crimes, that's national security. Exactly, which is why the FBI is involved instead of just local prosecutors. Harold Vaughn isn't just a corrupt developer, he's a security risk. Webb's expression hardened. Some of those Chinese and Russian investors, they're connected to intelligence services. They're using Harold's projects to establish presences in San Diego, get close to military installations, potentially conduct espionage operations. Margaret's strategic mind immediately grasped the implications. San Diego was home to Naval Base, San Diego Naval Air Station, North Island Marine Corps, Air Station Miramar, and multiple other military facilities. Foreign intelligence services would pay millions for legitimate business covers in the area. How long until you make arrests? That depends on Harold, Torres said. We have enough evidence to charge him now, but we want to catch him in the act of witness tampering. It's the one crime where we can put him at the scene, prove direct involvement, eliminate any deniability. When he comes after you, and we'll have agents ready to document everything. And if he sends someone to hurt me instead of doing it himself, we'll protect you. But more importantly, we'll flip whoever he sends. Get them to testify against him in exchange for reduced charges. Harold's entire operation is built on loyalty bought with money and fear. Take away the money and the fear, and people talk. Margaret sat back down, her coffee forgotten and cold. What do you need me to do? Keep doing what you're doing, Webb said. Don't back down. Don't take any settlements. File your police report, cooperate with the district attorney, and let Harold escalate. We'll be watching every move he makes. And when this goes to trial, both trials, The assault case against Derrick and eventually the federal case against Harold. You'll testify truthfully about what happened. That's all. Torres's voice softened. I know this is a lot to take on, but you should know we've been looking for someone like you for months. Someone Harold can't buy, can't intimidate, can't destroy. Someone with the courage to stand up and tell the truth no matter what it costs. Courage, Margaret smiled bitterly. I'm not sure courage is the right word. Maybe stubbornness or anger. I'm just tired of watching bullies win. After the FBI agents left, Margaret sat in her quiet kitchen and allowed herself to feel the weight of what she'd agreed to. She wasn't just fighting Derrick's assault charge anymore. She was helping to bring down an entire criminal enterprise taking on a man who'd corrupted the justice system itself. Her phone buzzed. Commander Morrison. Ghost. I just got a very strange call from FBI asking to verify your service record. What's going on? I can't tell you. Not yet. But Hawk, if something happens to me. Nothing's going to happen to you. Tell me what's going on. I can't. I'm sorry. Just, if I don't check in with you every 24 hours for the next few weeks, assume something's wrong and contact the FBI. Morrison's voice went hard with concern. Ghost, you're scaring me. Whatever you're involved in, you don't have to do it alone. Let me help. You are helping, just by being someone I can trust. She paused. Hawk, do you remember what you said when you graduated from sniper school, your speech at the ceremony? I said a lot of things. I was 25 and thought I knew everything. You said that snipers were patience personified, that we wait in position for days if necessary, uncomfortable exposed, waiting for the one shot that matters. And when that shot comes, we don't miss. I remember. This is that shot, the one that matters, I can't miss. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Whatever you're doing, Ghost, make it count, and stay alive. That's an order. She smiled despite everything. You can't give me orders anymore, Commander. I'm retired. Fine, then it's a request. From someone who considers you family. After they hung up, Margaret made herself dinner, grilled chicken and vegetables, simple and nutritious. While she ate, she thought about family. David had been her family, and his death had left her alone in the world. No children, no siblings, parents long dead. The Navy had been her family for 24 years, and then that was gone too. But maybe Morrison was right. Maybe family wasn't just blood or legal ties. Maybe it was people who stood with you when everything went dark, who trusted you to take the shot, even when the odds were against you. Her doorbell rang again at 2000 hours. Margaret checked the camera and saw Travis standing on her porch looking nervous and holding a manila envelope. She opened the door. Travis, what are you doing here? I'm sorry to just show up, but I didn't have your email and I thought this was too important to wait. He held out the envelope. After I gave my statement to the police, I went back through my files from working at Apex Tactical. I found some things you need to see. Margaret took the envelope and opened it. Inside were printed emails, financial records, and what looked like surveillance photos. What am I looking at? Evidence that Derrick's been running a side business using Apex Tactical resources, Travis said, his voice shaking slightly. He's been providing muscle for his father's real estate deals, intimidating tenants, threatening contractors who complain about not getting paid, roughing up people who cause problems for Harold Vaughn's business interests. Margaret flipped through the documents, her heart rate accelerating. This was exactly what the FBI needed, direct evidence linking Harold and Derrick in criminal activity. Travis, have you shown this to the police? Not yet. I wanted to give it to you first. Let you decide how to use it. He swallowed hard. Miss Carson, I need you to understand something. When I took this job with Derrick, I thought it was legitimate security work. But over time, I realized we weren't protecting people, we were hurting them. I stayed because I needed the money, because I was afraid of what Derrick would do if I left. I'm not proud of that. You left when it mattered. I left when it was safe, when you'd already exposed him when his business was already falling apart. That's not courage, that's just survival. Travis's eyes were wet. But I can do something now. These documents prove Derrick was operating as Harold's enforcer. They prove it wasn't just Derrick being violent on his own, it was a pattern directed by his father. Margaret studied the young man's face, saw the guilt and the desperate need for redemption. She'd seen that look before on young soldiers who'd made mistakes and were trying to find their way back to honor. Travis, I need to ask you something important. Are you willing to testify about this in court? Because if these documents are real, and if you're willing to testify, this could help bring down both Derrick and Harold. I'll testify, whatever it takes. His voice was firm now, the shaking gone. I can't undo what I did while working for them, but I can make sure they face consequences. You might face consequences too, depending on what you witnessed or participated in. I know. The police already told me I might be charged as an accessory to some of Derrick's actions. My lawyer says if I cooperate fully, I'll probably get probation or a suspended sentence. But even if I don't, I'm willing to accept that. I'd rather go to jail knowing I did the right thing than stay free, knowing I helped them hurt people. Margaret made a decision. Wait here. She went inside, got her phone and called the number Special Agent Webb had given her. He answered on the first ring. Miss Carson, everything all right? I have something you need to see. A witness with documents connecting Derrick Vaughn to Harold Vaughn's criminal activities. Can you come back to my house? We're 10 minutes away. While they waited, Margaret made Travis coffee and let him sit in her living room. He looked around at the photos on her walls, the military commendations, the pictures of her with David. Was that your husband? He asked, pointing to a photo of Margaret and David on their wedding day. Yes, he died 12 years ago. I'm sorry. Travis was quiet for a moment. My dad's a veteran too. Army, 2 tours in Iraq. He taught me that service means sacrifice, that sometimes you have to put aside what you want and do what's right. I forgot that when I took the job with Derrick, got focused on money and career instead of principles. You remembered in time. That's what matters. Did you ever forget, in your 24 years of service, did you ever compromise your principles? Margaret thought about that, really thought about it. Yes, not often, but yes. There were students I passed who probably should have washed out because their command pushed me to give them another chance. There were times I looked the other way when I should have reported problems because I was tired of fighting. There were moments when I chose the easy path instead of the right one. She met his eyes. The question isn't whether you'll make mistakes. You will. The question is what you do after. Do you rationalize it and keep going down that path, or do you stop, acknowledge it, and choose differently next time? How do you live with the guilt? You don't get rid of it, you carry it. Let it remind you why principles matter. She gestured at the photos. Every person I trained, I told them the same thing. The rifle is a tool. Your character is what determines whether you use it for good or evil. Skills without character just makes you a more effective monster. The doorbell rang. Webb and Torres were back this time with a third agent carrying an evidence kit. Travis told his story, handed over the documents, and answered their questions for 2 hours. Margaret watched as the FBI agents went through the evidence, their expressions growing more focused, more intense. This was significant, maybe the missing piece they'd been looking for. Mr. Patterson, Webb finally said, using Travis's last name, this is extremely valuable. These documents show a direct connection between Harold and Derrick's criminal activities. Combined with your testimony about what you witnessed while working for Apex Tactical, this could be the foundation of our conspiracy charges. What happens now? Travis asked. Now we verify everything you've told us. Check the documents, interview other witnesses, build a timeline. If everything checks out, and I believe it will, we'll want you to testify before a grand jury. Webb's expression softened slightly. I'm going to be honest with you. Your cooperation won't make the charges against you disappear completely. You participated in some of Derrick's activities even if you didn't fully understand what was happening. But cooperation counts for a lot. Work with us, testify truthfully, and we'll make sure the prosecutor knows you did the right thing in the end. After they left, taking Travis with them to give a formal statement at the FBI field office, Margaret sat alone in her living room. It was nearly midnight. She'd been up for 20 hours, most of them spent in high-stress situations, yet she wasn't tired. The old military stamina was still there, the ability to function on adrenaline and purpose. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number, but she answered. Margaret Carson. A woman's voice, young, frightened. Yes. Who is this? My name is Rebecca Sloan. You don't know me, but I know what you're doing. Standing up to Harold Vaughn. I wanted to warn you he's going to come after you hard. He's planning something. Margaret's grip tightened on the phone. How do you know this? I work as a paralegal at Vaughn and Associates, Harold's law firm. I've been there for 3 years and I've seen things, terrible things. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Tonight, Harold called a meeting with his security team. I wasn't supposed to hear, but I stayed late to finish work and I overheard them talking. They're planning to discredit you, Margaret. They're going to make you look unstable, unreliable. They have investigators digging into your past looking for anything they can use. That doesn't surprise me. There's more. Harold told them if character assassination doesn't work, they should consider other options. Those were his exact words, other options. I think he means violence. Margaret felt ice form in her veins. Rebecca, have you told anyone else about this? No, I'm terrified. If Harold finds out I warned you, he'll destroy me. He's done it to other employees who crossed him, but I can't just stay silent while he plans to hurt you. You're a veteran, you served your country. It's not right. Rebecca, I need you to do something for me. Call this number. Margaret rattled off Special Agent Webb's direct line. Tell him everything you just told me. Tell him I sent you. He'll protect you. I could lose my job, my career. You'll lose your soul if you stay silent. Trust me on this. I've seen what happens to people who compromise their principles to keep a paycheck. The money stops mattering eventually. Your conscience doesn't. Rebecca was crying now, soft sobs. I'm scared. Being scared is smart. But you called me, which means you're also brave. Hold on to that. After Rebecca hung up, Margaret immediately called Webb. Another one, he said when she explained. Harold's really panicking. She said he's considering violence. Other options. We heard the same conversation. We have his office bugged, but having an insider witness is even better. She can testify about the culture of intimidation, the pattern of behavior. Webb paused. Miss Carson, I want to increase security on you. Move you to a safe house until... No. Harold just talked about using violence against you. And you'll catch him if he tries. That's the whole point, isn't it? You want him to escalate to make mistakes. Margaret kept her voice steady. I'm not hiding. I'm not running. I'm staying right here in my house, living my normal life, and letting Harold make his choices. That's incredibly dangerous. I spent 24 years in dangerous situations. This is what I do. Torres's voice came on the line. They had her on speaker. Miss Carson, there's brave and there's reckless. Harold Vaughn is cornered now. He knows the FBI is investigating him. He knows his son is facing criminal charges. He knows his whole empire is collapsing. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. Then you better make sure your surveillance is good, because I'm not backing down. She hung up and walked through her house, checking locks, noting sight lines, planning defensive positions. Old training taking over muscle memory from decades of tactical thinking. If Harold sent someone, she'd be ready. Her doorbell rang at 0100 hours. Margaret checked the camera and saw Cole Derrick's second-in-command from Apex Tactical standing on her porch. He was alone, hands visible, no obvious weapons. But everything about his body language screamed threat. She opened the door with the chain engaged. It's 1 a.m, Mr. Cole. I know. I'm sorry. But I needed to talk to you and it couldn't wait. He looked nervous, his eyes darting to the street behind him. Can I come in just for 5 minutes, please? Please. Every instinct told Margaret this was a trap. Cole was loyal to Derrick, had stood by him even after Travis quit. But something in his expression, something that looked like genuine fear, made her hesitate. Why should I trust you? Because I'm about to commit career suicide and I need you to witness it. He pulled out his phone, held it up so she could see the screen. I'm recording this conversation. Everything I'm about to tell you is on record. If I'm lying, you can use it against me. If I'm telling the truth, you'll want to hear it. Margaret studied his face for another long moment, then made a decision. Hands where I can see them at all times. You make any sudden moves, I put you down. Understood. Understood. She let him in but stayed near the door, maintaining distance, ready to react. Cole stood in her living room, looking at the photos on her walls just like Travis had. You really did train SEAL snipers, he said quietly. All those years. All those men who went on to do things that probably saved lives. That means something. What do you want, Mr. Cole? He took a breath. Harold Vaughn gave me $50,000 tonight, cash. He told me to make you go away, said I could interpret that however I wanted as long as the problem was solved permanently. Margaret's muscles tensed, ready to fight, but Cole held up his hands. I'm not going to do it. That's why I'm here. I'm telling you so you can protect yourself, and so the FBI can use it as evidence against Harold. His voice cracked. I've done a lot of things I'm not proud of. Hurt people who didn't deserve it. Looked the other way when Derrick crossed lines. But murder, I'm not a killer, Miss Carson. I'm not crossing that line. Why not just go to the police? Because I need you to understand something first. Derrick's planning to come after you himself, tomorrow night. Harold doesn't know he thinks I'm handling it. But Derrick found out his father hired me and he's furious. Says it should be him that he needs to finish what he started at the coffee shop. Cole met her eyes. He's going to break into your house. He's armed, and he's not planning to just scare you. Margaret felt cold clarity settle over her. This was it. The moment she'd been preparing for since Derrick first put his hands on her. When, tomorrow night, late, after 2300 hours, he thinks you'll be asleep, thinks it'll be easy. Cole's hands were shaking now. I'm telling you this because you saved Travis. You showed him what real courage looks like, and he quit because of you. That took guts. Maybe you can do the same for me. What do you want from me? I want to testify. Against Harold, against Derrick, against all of it. I want to help bring them down. And then I want to do my time and try to figure out how to be the kind of man my mother raised me to be before I let money and loyalty to the wrong people turn me into this. Margaret pulled out her phone and called Webb. You need to get here now. I have another witness, and we have less than 24 hours to prepare for an attack. The FBI agents arrived within 20 minutes, and Margaret's living room transformed into a command center. Cole repeated his story this time on official record, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. Webb and Torres worked their phones, coordinating with tactical teams while a tech specialist set up surveillance equipment. We need to wire your house, Webb said to Margaret, audio and video in every room. When Derrick breaks in, we'll have documentation of everything attempted assault, breaking and entering, conspiracy to commit violence. And you'll be close enough to intervene if things go wrong, Margaret asked. We'll have a team positioned within 30 seconds of your location. Armed federal agents fully briefed. The moment Derrick makes his move, we move. Cole sat hunched on her couch, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee he hadn't touched. I should have come forward sooner. Months ago. Years ago. I watched Derrick hurt people, and I did nothing because the money was good and because I was afraid. You're here now, Torres said, not unkindly. That counts for something. Does it? Does it count for the people we hurt? The contractors. Derrick threatened the tenants Harold had us intimidate. Cole's voice broke. I was Army once. Honorable discharge. I knew better. I just stopped caring about doing better. Margaret sat down across from him. Cole, I'm going to tell you something I learned training snipers. The hardest shot isn't the longest range or the worst conditions. It's the shot you have to take on someone who was your friend yesterday. Someone you trained with, fought beside, trusted. But if that person becomes a threat to innocent lives, you take the shot anyway, because principles matter more than friendship. I'm taking the shot on people I worked with for years, because they became a threat to innocent lives. That's the right choice, even when it's hard. She held his gaze. You can't undo the past, but you can choose who you are from this moment forward. That's the only control any of us really have. The tech specialist finished installing cameras and microphones hidden so carefully that Margaret couldn't spot them, even knowing where to look. Webb reviewed the tactical plan, showed her where agents would be positioned, explained the signals she could use if she needed immediate intervention. But ideally, you let Derrick fully commit, Webb said. Let him break in. Let him make his intentions clear. Give him enough rope to hang himself. The more evidence we have of his violent intent, the stronger our case, not just against him, but against Harold for conspiracy. You're asking me to let an armed man who wants to hurt me into my house, Margaret said flatly. You understand that's a big ask. We do, but you have training experience. You've been in worse situations. Margaret thought about that. She'd been in hostile territory during her one combat deployment, had taken fire, had returned fire, but that was 26 years ago and she'd been 32. Then, not 58. Her reflexes were slower now, her body less resilient to trauma. Still, her mind was sharp, her training solid. And more importantly, she trusted herself in a way she hadn't when she was younger, trusted her judgment, her instincts, her ability to stay calm when everything went to hell. All right, she said. We do this your way. But if I give the signal that I need help, you better move fast. Torres pulled her aside while Webb briefed Cole on protective custody arrangements. Miss Carson, I need to ask, are you doing this for justice or revenge? Does it matter? It might. Revenge makes people reckless, clouds judgment, gets people killed. Margaret considered the question seriously. I want justice. For myself, for everyone Harold and Derrick have hurt for the system they've corrupted. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't anger there too. He hit me, laughed about it, tried to buy me off when that didn't work. Some part of me wants him to know what it feels like to be powerless, afraid at someone else's mercy. That's honest, at least. But I won't let anger compromise the mission. I've spent too many years training people to separate emotion from execution. I know how to do that. She met Torres's eyes. Tomorrow night I'll be calm professional, and I'll do exactly what needs to be done. Nothing more, nothing less. Torres nodded, apparently satisfied. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. But sleep didn't come easily. Margaret lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the decisions that had led to this moment. If she'd just stayed quiet in the coffee shop, let Derrick yell at Elena, none of this would be happening. She'd still be invisible, anonymous, living her quiet, retired life. But Elena would still be crying. Derrick would still be hurting people. Harold would still be corrupting the system. And she'd still be alone with her anger and her grief and her sense that the world was fundamentally unjust. Maybe this was better. Maybe standing up, even knowing the cost, was better than sitting down in silence. She finally fell asleep around 0300 and woke at 0630, as always. The house was quiet, the surveillance equipment invisible. If she didn't know FBI agents were monitoring her every move, she'd never guess. Her phone buzzed with messages. Commander Morrison checking in. Detective Chen confirming Derrick's arraignment had been scheduled. Patricia Holloway, her lawyer, wanting to discuss strategy. And one from Travis. I heard what's happening tonight. Be careful. You've already done enough. You don't have to risk yourself further. But she did have to. Not for justice or revenge, but because 24 years of military service had taught her that some battles you couldn't walk away from, some stands you had to make, regardless of personal cost. At 1,000 hours, her doorbell rang. She checked the camera, expecting FBI agents, but seeing instead a woman in her 70s, frail, and using a cane, standing with a younger man who looked familiar. Margaret opened the door cautiously. Can I help you? Miss Carson, my name is Dorothy Patterson. This is my grandson, Travis. The old woman's voice was soft but firm. I came to thank you. Travis looked embarrassed but proud. Grandma insisted. I told her about what happened, about how you showed me what real courage looks like. She wanted to meet you. Margaret invited them in, made tea, and listened as Dorothy told her story. She'd been a Navy nurse at Pearl Harbor, survived the attack, served throughout the war, and married a Marine who died in Korea. She'd raised Travis after his parents were killed in a car accident when he was 8. I taught him about service and honor, Dorothy said, her weathered hands wrapped around the teacup. But somewhere along the way, he forgot, got caught up with the wrong people, made bad choices. I prayed every night that something would wake him up before it was too late. Grandma, you don't need to. Hush, child. Let me finish. She turned to Margaret. You were the answer to those prayers. You showed him that standing up to bullies isn't about physical strength or weapons. It's about character. About refusing to compromise your principles, no matter the cost. Margaret felt her throat tighten. He found his own courage, Mrs. Patterson. I just gave him an example. Examples matter. When you're lost, when you've compromised yourself, sometimes all you need is someone to show you what integrity looks like. You did that for my boy. Tears tracked down Dorothy's wrinkled cheeks. You gave me my grandson back. The real one, the one I raised. However, I can repay that. You already have, Margaret said softly. Knowing Travis found his way back, that he's going to be all right, that's payment enough. After they left, Margaret sat in her quiet house and let herself feel the weight of what Dorothy had said. For 6 years, she'd thought her life was over, that her meaningful work had ended with retirement. But maybe that wasn't true. Maybe influence didn't require a uniform or official position. Maybe one person standing firm could ripple outward in ways you never anticipated. The day passed slowly. FBI agents rotated through checking equipment, reviewing plans. Webb brought lunch sandwiches from a deli Margaret liked, which meant they'd researched even her food preferences. She appreciated the thought, but couldn't eat much, her stomach tight with anticipation. At 1700 hours, her phone rang. Harold Vaughn. Webb, listening through surveillance equipment from his van parked down the street, gave her a thumbs up. Let him talk. Document everything. Mr. Vaughn. Margaret answered, putting him on speaker so the house microphones would catch every word. Miss Carson, I'm calling one last time to see if we can resolve this situation like civilized adults. I told you my answer. It hasn't changed. I'm prepared to offer you $1 million. Wire transfer to any account you specify. All charges dropped, all grudges forgotten. You can move anywhere in the world, start fresh, live comfortably for the rest of your life. $1 million. It was a staggering sum, more money than Margaret had earned in her entire military career. She could travel, see the world she'd only ever visited on deployments. She could set up scholarships for military kids, donate to veteran organizations. She could do real good with that money. No, she said simply. Harold's voice tightened. You're making a serious mistake. This offer expires tonight. After that, things become much more difficult for you. Is that a threat, Mr. Vaughn? It's a reality. I've tried to be reasonable to solve this problem with money like a businessman, but you've rejected every overture. That leaves me with limited options. Limited options? Like sending your son to attack me, like offering Cole $50,000 to make me go away permanently, like bribing witnesses and tampering with evidence. Silence on the line. Then Harold's voice, cold and controlled. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. And so do the FBI agents who've been monitoring your communications for 18 months. They know about the bribes, the money laundering, the foreign investors, all of it. You're not just fighting me, Harold. You're fighting federal investigators who've been building a case against you for years. I'm just the catalyst that made you panic and start making mistakes. Another long silence. Then, you're lying. If the FBI was investigating me, I'd know. Would you? You're so used to controlling everything, to having people in your pocket, that you've become arrogant. You think your money and connections make you untouchable. But some institutions still work. Some people can't be bought. The FBI is closing in, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. If you think, Harold started, but Margaret cut him off. I'm done talking to you. Don't call me again. Save your energy for your lawyers. You're going to need them. She hung up her hand, shaking slightly with adrenaline. Webb's voice came through a hidden speaker the tech specialist had installed. That was perfect. He practically admitted to conspiracy on a recorded line. His lawyers are going to have a hell of a time explaining that away. Torres's voice joined in. We're moving the arrest timeline up. Harold's panicking, which makes him unpredictable. We'll take him into custody at 0600 tomorrow, right after we deal with Derrick tonight. The afternoon stretched into evening. Margaret made dinner she couldn't eat, sat with a book she couldn't focus on, watched the sun set through her window. At 2200 hours, Webb's voice came through the speaker. Miss Carson, we're in position. Thermal imaging shows someone approaching your house from the north. Male, approximately 6 feet tall, carrying what looks like a firearm. We believe it's Derrick Vaughn. Margaret's heart rate spiked, but her hands stayed steady. 24 years of training taking over, flooding her system with calm focus. Understood. I'm going to my bedroom now like I would on a normal night. Let me know when he's inside. She went through her nighttime routine, changing into pajamas, brushing her teeth, all the mundane actions of a woman who had no idea someone was about to break into her home. Then she lay down in bed, lights off, but her eyes open and her mind calculating distances, angles, defensive positions. At 22:47 hours, she heard the soft scrape of metal on metal at her back door. Derrick was picking the lock, trying to be quiet. Margaret's muscles tensed, but she stayed in bed playing the role of potential victim. The lock clicked open. The door creaked slightly as it swung inward. Footsteps, soft but audible, moving through her kitchen into the hallway. Derrick was trying to be stealthy, but he'd never learned real operational silence. Margaret could track his position by sound alone. He paused outside her bedroom door. Margaret controlled her breathing, shallow and regular, like someone sleeping. The door opened slowly, and Derrick's silhouette appeared backlit by the hallway nightlight. He stood there for a long moment just watching her. Then he stepped inside, one hand holding what looked like a Glock 9mm with the other reaching out toward her. "Wake up, old lady," he whispered. "Time to finish what I started." Margaret's eyes snapped open. "Hello, Derrick. I've been waiting for you." He jerked back, surprised, the gun coming up instinctively. That was when Webb's voice boomed through the house, amplified by hidden speakers. "FBI, drop the weapon. Drop it now." Lights flooded on, not just in the bedroom, but throughout the house, brilliant and disorienting. Derrick spun confused, the gun still in his hand. "Drop the weapon or we will fire." Webb's voice again, and now Margaret could hear the tactical team rushing through her house boots, pounding voices, shouting commands. Derrick turned back to Margaret, his face twisted with rage and fear. "You set me up. You planned all of this." "You set yourself up," Margaret said, sitting up calmly in bed. "I just gave you the opportunity to make your choices. You chose violence. Again. FBI. Last warning. Drop the weapon." Derrick's hand tightened on the gun, and for one terrible moment, Margaret thought he might actually pull the trigger. Then the moment passed and his arm dropped the gun, falling to the floor. Agents swarmed him, throwing him to the ground, cuffing his hands behind his back, searching him for other weapons. Webb appeared in the doorway, his own weapon drawn, eyes scanning for threats. "Miss Carson, are you hurt?" "I'm fine. Just tired of having armed men in my bedroom." Webb cracked a smile despite the tension. "We'll get out of your way shortly. Torres, get Derrick out of here." They hauled Derrick to his feet. He was crying now, ugly sobs of rage and humiliation. "My father is going to destroy all of you. You have no idea who you're messing with." "Actually, we do," Torres said. "And right now a team is arresting your father. Wire fraud, tax evasion, bribery, money laundering, conspiracy to commit witness tampering, and about 40 other charges. You'll both have plenty of time to talk about it in federal prison." Derrick's face went white. No, that's not, he wouldn't." "He would, and he did. We have recordings, documents, witness testimony. Your father built an empire on corruption, and you were his enforcer. That ends tonight." They led him away, still protesting, still crying. Margaret sat in her bed, surrounded by FBI agents and surveillance equipment, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. A sense that justice might actually exist, that systems could work when people refused to be intimidated. Webb returned after 20 minutes. "Harold's in custody. Didn't go quietly, tried to call his lawyers, threatened everyone involved, claimed diplomatic connections that don't exist. But he's in handcuffs heading to federal detention. Both he and Derrick will be arraigned tomorrow morning." "What happens now?" "Now we build the case. You'll testify at the grand jury, probably at trial. Cole and Travis will testify. Rebecca Sloan from Harold's law firm will testify. We've got 3 more witnesses who came forward after your shooting demonstration video went viral. People who'd been intimidated by Harold in the past but were afraid to speak up until they saw someone stand up to him." Torres added, "You started a ripple effect, Miss Carson. One person refusing to back down gave other people the courage to do the same. That's how we bring down people like Harold Vaughn, not just with evidence but with witnesses willing to stand up despite the risk." After the FBI cleared out, taking their equipment and leaving her house blessedly quiet, Margaret made herself a cup of tea and sat at her kitchen table as dawn approached. She'd been awake for nearly 24 hours, but she felt energized in a way she hadn't in years. Her phone buzzed. Commander Morrison. I heard through the military grapevine that something went down at your house last night. FBI raid arrests. Ghost, what the hell did you get yourself into? I stood up to a bully hawk. Everything else just followed from that. You could have been killed. I could have been killed hundreds of times during my career. This was just one more risk, one more mission, and we got the target. Morrison was quiet for a moment. You know what this means? You're going to be in the news, probably national news. Decorated Navy sniper instructor helps FBI take down corrupt real estate developer and his violent son. It's a hell of a story. I don't want to be a story. I just want to go back to being invisible. Too late for that, Ghost. You're visible now. Question is, what are you going to do with that visibility? Margaret thought about Dorothy Patterson's visit, about Travis finding his courage, about Rebecca Sloan risking her career to warn her, about Cole choosing to testify despite knowing it would cost him. She thought about all the people who'd been intimidated into silence by Harold Vaughn over the years, and all the people who might be emboldened to speak up now that they'd seen him fall. I don't know yet, she admitted, but I'll figure it out. 3 days later, Margaret sat in the federal courthouse waiting to testify before the grand jury. Derrick and Harold had both been denied bail. The judge ruled they were flight risks with access to significant financial resources. They sat in federal detention, their empire crumbling around them. The media attention had been intense. Local news, then regional, then national. The story had everything: a decorated veteran, a corrupt developer, dramatic arrests, themes of justice and accountability. Margaret had declined all interview requests, but that didn't stop journalists from digging into her background, her military career, her husband's death. The headlines wrote themselves: Navy sniper instructor takes down developer dynasty. One woman's stand against corruption. How Margaret Carson became an unlikely hero. But sitting in the courthouse, Margaret didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who'd made the only choice her conscience allowed and was now dealing with the consequences. Patricia Holloway, her lawyer, sat beside her. The grand jury should be straightforward. Just tell the truth. That's all they need. That's all I've been doing. I know. And look what it accomplished. Holloway gestured to a newspaper on the bench beside them, its front page dominated by photos of Harold and Derrick in handcuffs. 3 other people have come forward with complaints against Harold since the arrest. A city councilman resigned after admitting he took bribes. 2 judges are under investigation. You didn't just bring down the Vaughns, you exposed an entire network of corruption. A young woman approached them, maybe 30, carrying a briefcase. Miss Carson, I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Park. I'll be presenting the case to the grand jury. Can I speak with you for a moment before we go in? They moved to a private conference room. Park reviewed Margaret's testimony, the evidence they'd be presenting, the charges they were seeking. We're going for conspiracy, racketeering, witness tampering, and about a dozen other charges. If the grand jury indicts on everything we're asking for, Harold could face 30 years. Derrick maybe 20 with the assault and breaking and entering charges combined with the conspiracy counts. Will they actually serve that time? With their resources, they'll appeal, they'll negotiate. But even if they get sentences reduced, they're going to prison. Real prison, federal. And their reputations are destroyed, their business empire is being liquidated, their political connections are severing ties as fast as they can. The damage is permanent. Margaret nodded slowly. I don't take pleasure in it. Destroying people, even people who deserve it. But I'm glad there are consequences. For once. There are consequences because you stood up, Park said. Because you couldn't be bought or intimidated or silenced. The system only works when people like you refuse to let it be corrupted. The grand jury testimony took 3 hours. Margaret answered every question, truthfully, walked them through the assault, the shooting demonstration, Harold's threats, Derrick's break-in. She showed them her split lip in the photos from the coffee shop, explained how FBI surveillance had documented everything. When she finished the jury foreman, a man in his 60s spoke up. Miss Carson, I just want to say thank you for your service to our country and for your courage in standing up to these people. You remind us that integrity still matters. Margaret felt her eyes burn but refused to cry. I just did what anyone should do, what everyone should do when they see injustice. But most people don't. the foreman said quietly. That's why your actions matter so much. The grand jury deliberated for 40 minutes and returned indictments on every charge the prosecution sought. Harold and Derrick Vaughn would stand trial for their crimes. Outside the courthouse, journalists swarmed, shouting questions. Margaret ignored them, walking to her car with Patricia running interference. But one voice cut through the chaos. Miss Carson, just one question. Margaret turned. A young woman, maybe 25, holding a notebook instead of a phone. I'm Sarah Chen, San Diego Tribune. I just want to know, what would you say to other people facing powerful opponents? People who are afraid to speak up because they think they can't win. Margaret stopped, considered the question. Around her, the crowd quieted, cameras turning to catch her response. I'd say this, Margaret said, her voice carrying across the courthouse steps. You don't have to win. You just have to stand. Stand for what's right, even when it costs you. Speak the truth, even when it's dangerous. Refuse to be silent in the face of injustice. If you do that, if enough people do that, the system starts to work again. Not perfectly, not always, but better than it does when good people stay quiet. She turned to leave, then paused. And I'd tell them they're not alone. Every time one person stands up, it gives others courage to do the same. We're all connected in that way. One act of courage ripples outward. You never know whose life you might change by refusing to back down. The crowd erupted with follow-up questions, but Margaret was done. She got in her car and drove home back to her quiet house in Claremont, where she could finally rest. 3 months later, Margaret stood in a courtroom packed with spectators and watched the jury foreman stand to deliver the verdict. In the case of United States versus Harold Vaughn on the charge of wire fraud, how do you find guilty? On the charge of money laundering, guilty. It went on for 20 minutes, guilty on 37 of 40 counts. Harold sat motionless, his expensive suit no longer enough to hide the fact that he was just another criminal facing justice. Derrick's trial had concluded a week earlier. Guilty of assault, breaking and entering, attempted assault with a deadly weapon conspiracy. Sentenced to 7 years federal prison. Harold would be sentenced next month, but the prosecution was seeking 25 years. At 68 years old, it was effectively a life sentence. After the verdict, Margaret left through a side entrance to avoid the media circus. She drove to the Veterans Haven coffee shop where Tommy was wiping down tables and Elena was making lattes. Ghost! Tommy called out, genuine joy in his voice. I heard the verdict on the radio. They got him. They got him, Margaret confirmed. Elena came around the counter and hugged her, something she'd done every time Margaret visited since the assault. Thank you, the old woman whispered. Thank you for standing up for me. Nobody ever did that before. Margaret held her gently, this frail woman who'd been the catalyst for everything. You deserve someone to stand up for you, Elena. Everyone does. She sat at her usual table with her usual coffee, opened her worn copy of Lonesome Dove, and tried to feel normal again. But normal had changed. People recognized her, now approached to shake her hand, to thank her, to tell her their own stories of standing up to bullies or finding the courage to speak truth. Her phone buzzed. Commander Morrison. Ghost, I have a proposal for you. The Navy wants to bring you back as a consultant, not for sniper training, for leadership development. Teaching officers about integrity, about standing up to corruption, about the importance of character over convenience. I'm retired Hawk. I know, but you're not done yet. These past few months have proven that. You've got something to teach that's bigger than marksmanship. Something the Navy desperately needs right now. Margaret thought about Dorothy Patterson, about Travis finding his way back to honor, about Cole choosing redemption over continued corruption. She thought about all the young officers coming up through the ranks, facing their own choices about who they wanted to be and what kind of leaders they wanted to become. Part-time, she said finally. A few days a month. I'm not coming back full-time. Part-time works. We'll take whatever you're willing to give. After they hung up, Margaret sat in the coffee shop and watched people come and go. A young mother with 2 kids struggling with the door. Margaret got up and held it open for her, an elderly veteran in a wheelchair trying to reach the counter. Margaret helped push him to the front. Small acts, nothing heroic, just being present, being helpful. being the kind of person who stood up when standing up mattered. That evening, she received an email from Travis. He'd enrolled in college, was studying psychology, planned to work with at-risk veterans. Cole was in federal prison serving 3 years, but he'd been writing letters to Travis, working through his guilt, trying to figure out who he wanted to be when he got out. Rebecca Sloan had left Vaughn and Associates and taken a job with a nonprofit legal aid organization, using her skills to help people who couldn't afford high-priced lawyers. One action rippling outward. Margaret had stood up to a bully in a coffee shop, and somehow that had set in motion a chain of events that changed lives, exposed corruption, reminded people that courage still mattered. 6 months after the verdict, Margaret spoke at the Navy SEAL Memorial Ceremony, addressing a crowd of active duty operators, veterans, and their families. "I spent 24 years teaching young men how to be lethal," she said, her voice carrying across the memorial grounds. "I taught them mathematics and physics, wind calls, and range estimation. I taught them patience and discipline. But the most important thing I tried to teach them, and the thing I hope they remember, is that all of those skills, all of that training, all of that lethality is worthless without character." She paused, looking out at the faces watching her. Skill without character is just violence. Training without integrity is just brutality. You can be the best shot in the world, but if you don't know when not to take the shot, you're not a warrior. You're just a killer. A breeze rustled through the memorial flags. Margaret continued, "Real strength isn't about how much force you can apply. It's about having force and choosing restraint. It's about having power and choosing mercy. It's about standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves, even when it costs you something." She thought about Derrick, about Harold, about all the men she'd encountered over the years who'd confused violence with strength, aggression with courage. They'd all been wrong. They'd all ended up defeated, diminished, exposed for what they really were: cowards, hiding behind force because they lacked the character to win with integrity. "I'm 58 years old," Margaret said. "I'm retired, widowed, living quietly in a small house in San Diego. By most measures, I have no power, no authority, no resources that matter in the world's terms. But when I stood up to someone who was hurting another person, when I refused to be intimidated or bought or silenced, I discovered something important." The crowd was silent now, hanging on her words. Real power isn't about what you have. It's about what you refuse to compromise. It's about drawing a line and saying this far and no further. It's about being willing to stand alone if necessary, because some principles are worth more than comfort or safety or money. She looked up at the memorial wall, at the names of fallen SEALs etched in stone. These men understood that. They stood between danger and innocent people. They made the hard choices. They did what was right, even when it cost them everything. That's the standard. That's what we're called to be, whether we wear a uniform or not. Margaret finished her speech and stepped away from the podium. The crowd rose in a standing ovation that went on for 5 minutes. Operators she'd trained decades ago, now senior leaders in the SEAL community, lined up to shake her hand, to thank her, to tell her that her lessons had saved their lives in ways that had nothing to do with marksmanship. Commander Morrison pulled her aside afterward. "That was something special, Ghost. I've been to 100 of these ceremonies. I've never heard applause like that. They're just being kind. No, they're being honest. You reminded them why they serve, why character matters, why we can't let the bad guys win just because they're willing to fight dirty." He smiled. "You know what they're calling you now, not Ghost. The Last Stand, because you're the person who stood when everyone else would have sat down." Margaret didn't like the nickname. It felt too grandiose, too heroic. But she understood what it represented. In a world where corruption often won, where bullies frequently triumphed, where good people stayed silent to avoid conflict, she'd been the exception. She'd stood up, spoken truth, and refused to back down. Not because she was special or brave or powerful, but because it was the only choice her conscience allowed. A year after the assault in the coffee shop, Margaret received a letter. It was from Derrick Vaughn, writing from federal prison. "Miss Carson, you don't know me anymore. The person who hit you, who broke into your house, who thought violence made him powerful, that person is gone. Prison does that. It strips away all the illusions about who you are and forces you to see yourself clearly. what I see is ugly. I see someone who was raised to believe money solved problems and force solved people. I see someone who never learned that strength comes from character, not intimidation. I'm writing to apologize. Not because it will change what I did or reduce my sentence, but because you deserve to hear it. I'm sorry for hitting you. I'm sorry for threatening you. I'm sorry for being the kind of person who thought he could get away with that. You stood up to me when nobody else would, and you exposed everything wrong with my life. That hurt. But it needed to hurt. Sometimes people need to be broken before they can be rebuilt. I'm broken now, working on being rebuilt. It'll take years, maybe decades. But I wanted you to know that your stand mattered. It changed me. It probably saved me from becoming someone even worse. Thank you for not backing down. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. Margaret read the letter twice, then filed it away. She wasn't sure she forgave Derrick. Forgiveness was complicated, earned over time through sustained change. But she believed in the possibility of redemption, the idea that people could learn from their mistakes and become better. Time would tell if Derrick's remorse was genuine or just prison conversion that would fade when he was released. But at least he was asking the right questions, now facing the right truths. That was a start. Harold never wrote. He filed appeals, fought his conviction with expensive lawyers, blamed everyone but himself. Some people never learned. Some people stayed broken because they refused to acknowledge they were damaged. Margaret couldn't save everyone. She could just stand for what was right and let the ripples spread where they would. On the anniversary of the assault, Margaret returned to the Veterans Haven coffee shop. Tommy had organized a small ceremony, nothing formal, just friends and supporters gathering to commemorate a moment that had changed everything. Elena was there, healthier now, smiling more. She'd told Margaret that standing up for her had given her confidence to stand up for herself in other areas of life. She'd reconnected with estranged family, started taking art classes, stopped letting fear dictate her choices. Travis was there with his grandmother Dorothy, who hugged Margaret like family. Travis was thriving in school, getting straight A's, already thinking about graduate programs. Cole was still in prison, but he'd sent a letter that Travis read aloud. I'm learning what honor means, not the word, but the practice of it. Miss Carson taught me that you can't earn honor. You have to live it every day in every choice. I'm trying to do that now. It's harder in here where violence is currency and weakness is punished. But I keep thinking about how she stood alone in that coffee shop, how she didn't need backup or weapons or anything except the conviction that she was right. If she could do that, I can do this. Other people came. Rebecca Sloan Marcus Webb from the FBI Detective Chen, even Jeffrey Chen, the lawyer who'd warned her about Harold, and had eventually quit his job to work for a legal aid nonprofit. Commander Morrison showed up with half a dozen SEAL instructors who'd trained under Margaret years ago. They presented her with a plaque, to Ghost, who taught us that the most important shot is the one you don't take when you have every right to pull the trigger. Thank you for showing us what restraint looks like, what character means, and what real strength is. Margaret accepted it with trembling hands and tears she didn't try to hide. I didn't do anything special. I just refused to be quiet when someone was being hurt. That's all any of us should do. But most of us don't, Travis said, echoing the grand jury foreman from months ago. That's why what you did matters so much. You showed us it was possible, that one person standing up could make a difference. As the small ceremony wrapped up and people started to leave, Margaret sat at her usual table with her usual coffee. Tommy brought her a slice of pie on the house. Elena squeezed her shoulder as she walked past. The world continued spinning. People lived their lives and everything was ordinary and mundane and beautiful. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Miss Carson, my name is Jennifer Torres. I was assaulted by my employer 2 weeks ago. I saw your story on the news. I've been afraid to come forward, afraid of what it will cost me. But if you could stand up to Harold Vaughn, maybe I can stand up to my boss. I'm filing a police report tomorrow. I wanted you to know that your courage gave me courage. Thank you. Margaret responded, I'm proud of you. It takes real strength to stand up for yourself. You're not alone in this. If you need support resources or just someone to talk to, I'm here. More texts came throughout the day. People she'd never met, strangers who'd heard her story, found her number somehow, and reached out to say her stand had inspired them to make their own stands. Against abusive partners, corrupt employers, racist neighbors, systems that seemed unchangeable until someone had the courage to challenge them. One person standing up, giving others permission to do the same. Ripples spreading outward, touching lives she'd never meet, changing outcomes she'd never know about. That night, Margaret sat on her back porch, looking up at the stars, thinking about David. He'd been gone 12 years, but she still felt his presence, sometimes still imagined what he'd say about everything that had happened. "I think you'd be proud," she said aloud to the empty air. "I finally figured out what to do with my anger. Not revenge, not bitterness. Just standing up when it mattered, making noise instead of staying invisible." The stars didn't answer, but Margaret felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt since David died. She'd found purpose again, not in training snipers or serving in uniform, but in being the kind of person who refused to compromise when others needed someone to stand with them. She was 59 years old now, retired, widowed, living in a small house in Claremont. She had no official power, no authority, no resources that mattered by the world's standards. But she had something more important than any of that. She had integrity that couldn't be bought, courage that couldn't be intimidated, and a willingness to stand alone if necessary because some principles were worth defending at any cost. Margaret Carson had been invisible for 6 years, ghost drifting through a quiet retirement, trying to find meaning in a world that had moved on without her. Then a bully hit her in a coffee shop, and she'd made a choice not to hit back, but to stand up, to refuse silence, to let the system work even when it seemed impossible. That choice had changed everything. Not just for her, but for Travis and Cole and Elena and Rebecca and Jennifer Torres and countless others whose names she'd never know. One stand rippling outward, reminding people that courage still mattered, that integrity couldn't be bought, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon wasn't a rifle or a fist. It was the simple, absolute refusal to back down when you knew you were right. She'd spent 24 years training warriors to be lethal. Now she was teaching something more important, that true warriors knew when not to pull the trigger, that real strength came from character, not force, and that one person standing firm could change the world in ways that violence never could. The invisible woman had become visible, not because she wanted attention or acclaim, but because she'd stood in that coffee shop and drawn a line that couldn't be crossed. And in standing, she'd reminded everyone watching that they could stand too, that bullies could be defeated, that systems could be made to work, that justice was possible when people refused to be silent. Margaret "Ghost" Carson had taken her last stand, and in standing she'd shown thousands of others how to stand as well. That legacy would outlast any shot she'd ever fired, any student she'd ever trained, any medal she'd ever earned. Some battles you won with bullets. Others you won by refusing to surrender your principles, no matter the cost. Margaret had fought both kinds, and she knew which victory mattered.